The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being from Chapter 1, How Trauma Sticks and the Mechanism of PTSD. One of the enduring mysteries in the field of psychology is why the same event produces such different memories and responses in different people. As the New York Times reported in a July 1st, 2004 article, 1 out of every 6 soldiers coming home from the war in Iraq is showing signs of emotional difficulties, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder. Citing a report in the New England Journal of Medicine, the writer noted the researchers surveyed more than 6,000 soldiers in the month before and after service in Iraq and Afghanistan. Almost 17% of those who fought in Iraq reported symptoms of major depression, severe anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder, compared with 11% of the troops who served in Afghanistan. In World War II, post-war depression and anxiety was called battle fatigue. In World War I, we called it shell shock. The question isn't so much why it happens. We know GIs in war do and see horrific things. The question that perplexes us is why post-war anxiety and depression haunts some veterans and not others. Of course, some vets see harder combat than others, but even that doesn't account for the statistics. There are still huge variations among individual soldiers in how they respond to the same event. The same is true in the civilian world. Some people develop PTSD and others don't, facing the exact same circumstances. In order to understand why some people are still shocked months and even years after a traumatic event, it's necessary to first understand how the brain and mind processes trauma. The brain is a complex collection of deeply interconnected parts and processes. I'm vastly oversimplifying here for the purpose of description. In light of those caveats, here's a possible scenario that's not inconsistent with much of what's known about brain function. There's a part of the limbic brain, or visceral brain, called the hippocampus that's believed to function as a one-day scratch pad for memory. Everything you experience throughout the day is stored in the hippocampus. In order for the impressions of the experience to become a long-term memory, they must pass through the hippocampus into the rest of the brain. People with a damaged hippocampus remember past events but have extreme difficulty learning new things. Although the rest of the brain is able to integrate recent information from the hippocampus in relation to stored memories, in order to understand that one thing happened a week ago and another thing happened a month ago, the hippocampus knows only one time, today. During the night as we sleep, the hippocampus dumps its information from the day into the rest of the brain for processing, sorting, storing, and disposing of irrelevant information. As the brain is processing the details of the day from the hippocampus, we experience what we call dreaming. Many sleep researchers are convinced that when we experience REM sleep, most of the events, including the traumas of our daily life, are processed. The processing of information management completed. When we wake up in the morning, the hippocampus is once again empty and ready to record another day. The problem emerges when the hippocampus is carrying information that's too much or too hot for the larger brain/mind to handle. When a recent memory is too strong to be easily and unremarkably processed, it presents in our dream world as a nightmare. If that still doesn't download the information from the hippocampus, then the trauma either becomes buried in the subconscious, a process Freud referred to as repression, or it gets thrown back into the hippocampus the next morning. It's as if the brain says, whoa, that's too much for me to process in one evening. Please hang on to it for another day. When the person wakes up in the morning, the information's still there in the hippocampus, still remembered and known and felt as if it happened that same very day. The conjecture that the hippocampus knows little about the more distant past accounts for the unique feature of true PTSD, that the person feels every day as if the past event happened today, or at least in the very recent past. The trauma is always front, center, new, fresh, and raw. The consequences can be psychologically and emotionally devastating. Every day is affected by a past event. The traumatic event never passes from now until then and is never processed and filed away in the memory banks, where it loses the power to cause pain and problems on a daily basis. The impact of this on the mind and the emotions is staggering. Brain scans even demonstrate that before a PTSD event has been processed, the amygdala, a part of the brain responsible for strong emotional states, such as those involved with survival or the perception of a threat to survival, and the hippocampus are not functioning normally. The brain scan makes it possible to, in a way, see the effect of the stuck memory. After processing the memory, these parts of the brain usually return to normal functioning. One of the key concepts of many schools of psychology is that human beings are most functional when every part of the mind has access to all other parts. In particular, this functionality is a matter of having full access to positive resources, such as memories of times when we were successful in our undertakings and the good feelings we associate with those accomplishments. Working from this level of functionality, then, when we take on a new task, for example, we first remember times in the past when we attempted something similar and accomplished our goals. This functionality can be accessed in all endeavors, from embarking on a new love relationship to making your first public speaking engagement. Memories of past accomplishments and capabilities are stored in parts of the brain far from the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala and hippocampus, part of our brain's most primary and primitive structures, lie deep in the brain. Thus, having a negative memory stuck deep in the hippocampus blocks the pain and fear associated with that memory from reaching and associating with positive memories and resource states, which are housed in more distant parts of the brain. So in other words, if we don't get these traumatic memories out of the hippocampus, then everything coming in gets filtered through that and blocked having access to resource states that can help and heal us. So the rest of the book is how to get that stuff out of the hippocampus. The book is Walking Your Blues Away.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And it's Anything Goes Friday. So, whatever you'd like to talk about, our number 202-808-9925. Thank you, Nate. And, but there is a fair amount of news going on today. Right now, because, the only way that Republicans can win elections consistently is by suppressing the vote of Democrats. This is something that Republicans have been acknowledging since 1980. You recall back in 1980 when Paul Weyrich was working on the Ronald Reagan campaign, and he had a group of Christian ministers down in Texas that he was speaking to. Actually, they weren't all ministers, but they were Christian Republican activists. Paul Weyrich, the one of the intellectual godfathers of the modern Republican Party, the author of the Two Santa Claus theory about how you destroy the Democratic Party by forcing them to shoot their own Santa Claus. In other words, declare, big government as we know it is, the era of big government as we know it is over, welfare as we know it is dead, things like that. That if you could, willing to cut Social Security through things like the chain CPI, if you could just get Democrats to do that, then they would lose their base. And Republicans, in the meantime, would become the Santa Claus, because the Democrats had brought us, Social Security and labor unions and a decent middle class and Medicare and Medicaid and all kinds of stuff. And Paul Weyrich was like, the only way to undo this is for Republicans to become Santa Claus. So they need to be the tax cut Santa Clauses. But even when Republicans are the tax cut Santa Clauses and they can get Democrats to shoot their Santa Claus, Social Security and programs that lift people out of poverty, even when that happens, it's still going to be a big lift. Well, here's Paul Weyrich, first of all, based on how you deal with that big lift. How, when the vast majority of Americans support the policies that are promoted by the old line Democratic Party, by FDR and Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society and the New Deal, when the vast majority of Americans, not just Democrats, support those policies, then what do you do if you're a Republican? Here was Paul Weyrich's advice in 1980 to the Reagan campaign, which they followed, by the way, and they continue to follow to this day. Here it is.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government, They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
So drive down the voting populace. And yep, you know, Republican secretaries of states are purging literally hundreds of thousands of people, apparently every week, from various states around the United States from their voter rolls. So now down in Georgia, John Ossoff nearly took that election, and he's going to run against Karen Handel in the general now. It's still a special election, and it's going to be, I think, June 20th, I believe is the date. And so what the Republicans are saying in Georgia is that anybody who registers to vote, like today, anybody who registers to vote, well, actually all the way up until March, the original deadline for last Tuesday's election was March 20th. So they're saying that anybody who tries to vote, to register after March 20th, can't vote in the June 20th runoff. Well, actually, you know, according to law, you should be able to register to vote up to May 22nd if you're going to vote. But so basically what the Republicans in Georgia are arguing is people who got really cranked up about this election, who live in Cobb County and the surrounding areas in Georgia 6, they can't register to vote and show up and vote in the election. And so we'll see where it goes. It's going before a judge, the NAACP, and the Georgia Coalition for People's Action, Pro-Georgia State Table, Third Sector Development, Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. A bunch of groups are suing. But you shouldn't have to sue the state to say, hey, why can't I vote if I'm registered to vote? Well, the simple answer why you can't vote if you're registered to vote is because Republicans don't want you to vote. In fact, the most effective way of suppressing the vote is with negative advertising. The principal thing that negative advertising does is it doesn't generate ads for your candidate. It causes people to say, they're all crooks, screw it. It suppresses the vote, which is why, you know, the Republican Party is masters at negative advertising. Meanwhile, great headline. This is from NJ.com, New Jersey, one of the newspapers in New Jersey. It's reprinted over at Raw Story. The headline, when you're swallowing raw sewage at the beach this summer, you can thank Donald Trump. Yep. As this is from the Star-Ledger, the New Jersey Star-Ledger editorial board. Again, we're getting these things from editorial boards of newspapers. Not op-ed opinion writers, not people like me, you know, write something and toss it up on Common Dreams or Alternet or something like that. But no, this is the editorial board. While we spend zillions on security at Mar-a-Lago and shuttling Trump children around the world and leaving Melania's son in private school in Manhattan, the president is cutting money to check if we're all swimming in fecal swamps. Yes, his budget would eliminate the funding that pays to test the water at our beaches every week for nasty bacteria, namely Enterococcus, the sign of fecal contamination causing maladies from gastrointestinal illness to ugly rashes. This is the result of raw sewage overflows that are worse after heavy rain. Last summer, our beaches were either under advisory or closed 134 times for that reason, the Asbury Park Press reports. Last year was the worst season in 5 years. 134 times they had to shut the beaches down because there was poop in the water, right? Fecal contamination. 1 week of testing found 19 beaches, this is just in New Jersey, in Monmouth and Ocean counties with water teeming with fecal bacteria. Trump's cuts to beach testing are part of his savage cutting of the Environmental Protection Agency, for which Barack Obama had sought to increase funding. Is incredible. So let's hope, federal money subsidizes farmers in Iowa and Nebraska. So why not tourism along our coast? Keeping the shores feces-free is vital for its economy. We only have enough funding to test through this summer. After that, who knows? Maybe the new test will accidentally get a mouthful of sewer water and falling horribly sick on vacation. Not sure what that sentence, how that makes sense, but anyway, you get the point. And so that's what's going on. But as I said, it's Anything Goes Friday. I've got a few other stories like how did civilization begin? It's an amazing piece that I'll share it with you at some point later. Stick around. We'll be back with your calls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Anything Goes Friday. Whatever you'd like to talk about, give us a shout. And welcome back. Darcy in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Darcy, thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Darcy. Sorry our phones weren't working yesterday. I think you called in and we weren't able to make it connect.
Yeah, I ended up holding for 2 hours and I finally had to go.
Oh, I'm sorry. So what's up?
I was wondering, have you ever heard of the Seth books by Jane Roberts?
Of the what books? Oh, Seth. Oh, yeah, I read one of them back in the late 70s, where he's a higher entity who gets channeled through Jane Roberts or whatever her name was, and he's like some kind of ancient Egyptian god or something.
No, not Egyptian.
Yeah. Well, whatever.
Anyway, yeah, it's about the physical versus non-physical world and consciousness.
Sure.
And I don't know. I think there's a whole lot of them, but I think those books apply to everything that you or we wonder about. And I was going to say that don't judge any of the books by the covers, because if I had, I would never have read them.
Yeah.
But I opened up the book in the middle and read like a page, which made me interested. And then when I looked back at the cover a long, long time later, I was appalled by it. But I thought the book was really interesting. Well, all the books are really interesting, and they touch on all the things that we talk about and wonder about. Mm. I was just curious, and what you thought of it.
Well, it's a whole collection of books like that. Carlos Castaneda wrote a bunch of them, about Don Juan, teaching him things. Professor Jay Fikes debunked Castaneda, was able to demonstrate that it was all written as fiction. Castaneda at first was claiming that it was not fiction. But then his stories, after his fourth book, they started getting really, really, really weird. The Seth books are, in my mind, clearly fiction, but, the author did a great job of taking basically, classic wisdom, the wisdom of Buddha, the wisdom of Jesus. I mean, just classic kind of common sense metaphysical wisdom, and putting it into this, interesting frame. Neil Donald Walsh did the same thing with his Conversations with God books, which have been, very, very popular. So, I have no problem with people, reading fiction or what is purported to be even channeled wisdom. See, the difference between the Seth books and the Bible and the Quran is all three claim to be basically channeled wisdom from a higher being. The difference is, Christianity and Islam created entire religions that then led to wars and deaths, literally of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, arguably billions of people, as a consequence of the belief systems that they were putting forward, even though most of the belief systems are not all that toxic. To the best of my knowledge, the Seth books have not engendered any kind of great movement beyond just people who like reading them. And the same thing with Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God books. Neil still does, I think he still does workshops and things. I used to do them with him. We would travel around the country together, and I would talk about Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, and he'd talk about his Conversations with God books. And, it's good stuff. It's great stuff. Anyway, Darcy, thanks a lot for the call. It's like I said, it had to be in the 70s that I was reading those. So it's been, 30 years, 40 years, something like that, quite some time. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity,
resistance, and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you 24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Thom Hartmann here with you, and Morgan in Roseville, California. Hey, Morgan, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, man, what's up? I wanted to kind of talk about and kind of ask some questions about Operation Paperclip. It was like Nazi scientists and technicians came over to America after World War II and completely subverted the war effort in World War II, and like all the soldiers died and stuff. And then they brought a bunch of Nazi scientists over, and so then they start like dictating all this stuff at like at levels of like.
Was this the program that brought in Werner von Braun?
I would suspect so. Yeah, I read that on Wikipedia. And what's scary is Reinhard Gehlen was the architect of the CIA.
Right, and he was old SS, wasn't
he? Operations against Russia, I think.
Yeah.
And so, fast forward, given. There was some experiments with like monkeys in test tubes and stuff, and it was real violent, and it's called MK Ultra.
Oh yeah.
And so now, what my concern is the reason why I called was because I experienced like electronic piercing sounds, electronic whine sounds, air pressure changes near my ear, electronic lo-fi hissing fuzz. And then it gets into like I heard one time, like barely on radio, that there's people that report they were tortured pre-birth awareness and stuff.
Yeah. Morgan, with those symptoms, have you had a neurological workup or a blood pressure workup? I mean, there are physical things that can cause the kind of things that you're describing.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, you should talk to your doctor before you go any farther. I'm not saying that the CIA isn't spying on you and playing games with you, but it's unlikely. And typically, if you're getting changes of what feels like changes of pressure in your ears and you're hearing funny noises, tinnitus, I think it's called, stuff like that, tinnitus. Thank you, Troy. And that's more likely a medical thing than you got spies going after you. Morgan, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Gus in Chicago, Illinois. Hey, Gus, you want to talk about Bernie bashing?
How you doing, Tom? Long-time listener, second-time caller.
Thank you.
And I'm calling in regard to basically in regards to the current election, the special one in Georgia.
Uh-huh.
And it's actually reactions from, I guess, something Bernie said, because I started listening to Stephanie Miller again for the first time in a while.
Uh-huh.
And I guess she got mad at, I don't know what it is, because I've actually been avoiding the news, but her and several other people who were big Clinton supporters were angry about something he said regarding Jason Ossoff, the guy
John Ossoff.
Who's running in Georgia, which is Gingrich's former district.
Right.
And they sort of were saying that, well, Hillary had more votes, so why is Bernie saying anything? Why should we basically conform to his ideas? Well, one, I thought there was supposed to be party unity, and two, your biggest problem is going to be right now not the Republicans, but the fact that the Democratic Party is not properly investing in these elections, like they didn't invest properly in the special election in Kansas.
Yeah.
And also, if they were smart, economic issues are tied to culture war and civil rights problems.
Right.
If you don't address those economic issues. And
there's a bit of a backstory here, Gus, and it's one that the Democratic Party needs to deal with, and frankly, I think is trying to deal with. I noticed a couple days ago that
actually, I think it started after Ossoff didn't hit 50%, right? And there are a couple of websites that really kind of went solidly Bernie during the primary, and a few other websites that went solidly Hillary during the primary. And it seems like the ones that, several of the ones, two of them in particular that I can think of, that were solidly Hillary during the primary against Bernie, have been basically, are continuing to trash Bernie. And on one of those websites a couple days ago, I saw this thread about, why didn't Bernie, if Bernie has all this power in the United States, he's got all these followers, he's got a lot of followers in Georgia, why didn't he come out and endorse Jon Ossoff? And Bernie just had not said a word at that point. He had just, no, he was endorsing other people, and he's traveling around endorsing the people that he's choosing to endorse. And it was like, well, Bernie could have done more, and then Jon Ossoff would have gotten 50%. So then that morphed into, let's start hassling Bernie and demanding that he support Jon Ossoff. And so somehow that got to some sort of critical mass where Bernie was asked about this, and either Bernie or one of Bernie's people. And the response that came from the Bernie camp, I guess, maybe specifically from Bernie, was that Jon Ossoff has not endorsed single-payer health care. He hasn't endorsed a $15 minimum wage. And that while he might be just a fine Democrat and a great guy to represent the 6th District of Georgia, he is not, the policies that he's so far, that he has not so far endorsed the policies that in Bernie's mind are critical to him, in raising tax. And Jon Ossoff has not also talked about income inequality in the way that Bernie would talk about it. So once that was said, then it became, oh, Bernie's attacking Jon Ossoff. And I don't think it was meant as an attack. It was, there's a lot of Democrats who don't support, that list of things, or at least don't openly support them. And I think, frankly, any Democrat is better than any Republican, particularly in Georgia's 6th. And I'm pretty sure that Bernie would agree with that. But so basically, he's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't. There's a bunch of people who hate Bernie, and in the Democratic Party, and for a variety of reasons. And now that Hillary Clinton is not president, many of them are directing their ire at him, saying he's why she's not president, or part of why she's not president. And
which is what I think is ridiculous, because I can get all day on that, but voter suppression had more to do with that than and the fact she didn't make Bernie her running mate.
Well, in the media, Bernie right now is on the 3rd or 4th city of a 10-city tour that he's doing. He had 2,000 people yesterday in Florida, I think it was, with Tom Perez, who is was the head of the Hillary-crats, as it were, while Bernie was the head of the Bernie-crats, or Tom Perez was the major spokesperson for the Clinton campaign, and now the head of the DNC. The two of them are trying to pull the party together. And then we've still got these, people in these websites frankly, on both sides. Some of the Bernie folks are still sitting around muttering about Hillary, which I think is stupid. And you've got a bunch of the old Hillary people sitting around going, oh, yeah, Bernie's not doing enough. But in the meantime, the media is a complete blackout on it, just like before the primary.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I don't think the corporate media is ever going to do an honest job of covering a genuine progressive.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading an excerpt from Robert Wolfe's book, Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing. I wrote the foreword for it. Robert Wolfe just died just a few months ago, just this last year, in Hawaii. Louise and I visited him there a number of times. He was in his 90s. And back in the 1950s, he was an anthropologist and sociologist who had been hired by the Malaysian government to figure out why this one particular Aboriginal tribe, the Sonoy, who lived deep inside the jungle, hunting-gathering tribe, why they were, quote, lazy, why they were unwilling to work in the rubber plantations. And he got to know them, and he discovered that their view of the world was completely different than ours. And that's essentially what this book is about, and it's absolutely a mind-boggling book. I'll share a little. This is from the middle of the book. This is page 86. It's finally he's reached the point where they'll let him sleep in the village with them. He says, in time, I grew to know them better. But it was when I began to overnight in their villages that I learned that they literally lived in another reality. When it became dark, people huddled together for warmth and companionship. In the tropics, there's no long period of dusk. It grows dark quickly. The air would become cool, and people would move closer together, reaching out, touching a neighbor, perhaps holding hands. Women might run their fingers through the hair of the person sitting next to them. During the nights I stayed over, they would often gather around me and have me ask them questions. Then they would ask me questions, very quietly and softly. Our being together was not like other social situations I'd ever experienced. We talked, but softly. They did not know how to compete for attention. A few words now and then were all that were spoken, a question or a comment, a simple answer, long silences. Sometimes someone would have some tobacco and light a cigarette, tobacco rolled into a leaf, which was passed around the group. People might ask each other whether they had noticed that particularly bright patch of sunlight on the side of the river behind a certain tree, or if they had noticed that large yellow bird that sang in the morning. Evening was a time of reflection, of gentle communication, of being together. I never knew their blood relationships, but evening times felt like family. As it grew later, one of the people would get up to go into one of the houses, more often little more than lean-tos or rickety huts on stilts, and fall asleep. Eventually, each of us had found an empty spot on the floor of one of the shelters, and wrapped in our sarongs, we huddled close to whoever else slept in that house that night. The houses did not belong to anyone. It seemed that each of the 4 or 5 little shelters was for all the people living in that settlement at that moment. We would fall asleep whenever we chose, and I'm sure with whomever we wanted to spend the night. Yes, people had sex, but even that was gentle, quiet, and discreet. Occasionally, someone might turn over and bump into a couple being a little too acrobatic or noisy, and there would be a grunt. Or people might move away from a couple that made too much to do about their lovemaking. Passionate lovemaking between young people often took place during the day, outside in a more hidden spot in the jungle, I was told. In the morning, we might not all wake up at the same time, but those who woke up early would lay quietly, waiting for more people to awaken. And somehow, as if by magic, we would find ourselves sitting in a circle, rubbing our eyes, stretching the kinks out. One person would say, I saw a bird, a beautiful bird. Someone else would say, yes, I too saw a bird. What kind of bird was it? Another would ask. And so they would create a story with images from our dreams. They did not think that they were sharing dreams as we think of dreams. The Sonoy believed that the world we live in is a shadow world, and that the real world is behind it. At night, they believe, we visit the real world. In the morning, we share what we saw and learned there. The story that was created around the memories that 4 or 5 people brought back from the real world set the tone for that day. Sometimes one of the group would take the lead in soliciting input from each person in the room. How about you? What do you remember? Other times, the story flowed without help. A few times, no story emerged at all. It was very obvious that when a more or less coherent story was created around the images we shared, we who had slept in that shelter would live that story that day. Usually, the stories were simple. A bird had shown the way to a tree that was bearing fruit. Later that day, some of us would find that tree, and of course, it did have ripe fruit. Or the story was about a bad storm, so people would stay close to the shelters all day, and yes, there was a big storm in the late afternoon. Occasionally, the stories were about things that affected all of them, all the people in the settlement, or perhaps even all the Sonoy. In that case, they would make it a point to share with the people who had slept in other shelters as soon as possible. It might take all morning to disseminate that story to everyone. I did not witness any attempts to call a meeting, but it was obvious that when a serious story came out of a morning's dream telling, all the people in the settlement would eventually hear that story. I learned about all of this very early during the time that I spent with the Sonoy. It was in what I thought of as the first village, the first settlement I visited, that an important story emerged from what I brought back from the real world during one of my nights there. It made a big impression on me because part of the story came from my dream. It was a particularly vivid dream about one of my family's dogs, an all-black mongrel that seemed to have come with the house we rented in the suburbs of Kuala Lumpur. We had tried to get rid of that dog. In fact, one of the first days after we moved we had run over to the poor dog in the driveway, but he would not leave. I tried chasing him away. He kept coming back. So we adopted him and called him Jaga, which is Malay for guard or protector. I do not remember that Jaga was a particularly good watchdog, but he was around. And he goes on to tell his dream, and then it's just an absolutely fascinating story. Original Wisdom, Stories of an Ancient Way of Knowing by Robert Wolfe.
Want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at HartmanReport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Walt in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Walt, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to speak to something that you kind of touched on right before the break, and then I've heard you talk about a lot before. But just in reference to President Trump's, all the accusations he's making about the fake news and the fake media, and everyone's out to get him. And I really wanted to say that I just feel like that is an extremely dangerous accusation for him to be making, because, I mean, building that distrust in the media, I mean, where does that lead us? It makes me think, George Orwell and state-controlled media and things like that.
Yeah, and it's not, Fox News is not state-controlled media, but it's billionaire-controlled media. And Donald Trump, of course, is a billionaire. He's surrounded himself with billionaires in his cabinet. He's proposed nothing but policy decisions so far, and done policy decisions so far that would be useful to billionaires, making it easier to dump coal waste in our streams and rivers, cutting funding for testing fecal waste on our beaches. It just goes on and on, And so, I think that, he really, over the last few years, has bought into the Fox News cult and really believes that Fox News is where the truth is, because, the source of a number of his false tweets that have almost created international incidents, or arguably even possibly could have led us to war, the source of the information in many of these false tweets that then you get people like Devin Nunes running around, scrambling around, trying to prove was Fox News in almost every single case. He watched something on Fox, he thought it was true, and he goes off on it, right? And if you're going to live inside that bubble and believe that it's all true, then you have to believe that all the other media ecosystem that is saying, no, sorry, what Fox is saying is not true, that they must be lying, that they must be fake. I mean, you got to pick one or the other, right? And he's clearly picked Rupert Murdoch, his fellow billionaire, and the network that is basically the shill for billionaires, to the rubes, the outreach to the rubes particularly in the red states, or at least the people that they perceive as the rubes, the 24/7 nonsense machine. So that's what I think is going on. Walt, thanks for the call. Good point. Chris in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Thank you for taking my call. I was curious how you felt about the Venezuela taking over the GM automotive plant down there, and is this going to be a trend with other governments around the world taking our companies as a pushback with Trump? And will he use military against his, for his buddies who have these corporations to go back in and retake those plants? You heard about that, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I read several articles about it yesterday. I think probably the most detailed one I read was in the Financial Times last night. I'm not an expert on the area, and in fact, I sent a note to Sean and Louise saying, maybe we could get Mark Weisbrot on the radio station, because he's a real expert on Latin America, and he's an economist, Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR.net, I think it is, and maybe .org. And I'm waiting to hear back on that. But my understanding from what I read, and so keep in mind, this is not an expert opinion. I'm not presenting it as such. And if anybody listening or watching knows better than I do, feel free. But basically the running battle that's been going on in Venezuela since the beginning of the Chavez so-called revolution has been between the very, very wealthy, the oligarchs of Venezuela, who have historically ruled and controlled the country, and the left wingers, as it were, who want to take the wealth of the country. They nationalized the country's oil. They took it away from the oligarchs and said, okay, the state-run oil company, all the profits are going to go to education and healthcare and stuff like that. But from where I'm sitting, what it looks to me like happened was the old thing, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that sort of like we saw with the Soviet Union, in some ways the Chavez government just, got way ahead of their skis, or whatever the phrase is in all of this. And so you've got
the problems of the revolution and the what is called the left in Venezuela, but you've also got a billionaire class that owns some of the media and that has been fighting, the socialist class in Venezuela for a long, long time. And the argument that the government is making, or seems to be making, is that the billionaire class is funding demonstrations. And, whether this is true or not, who knows? I would like to know. It's why I want to get Mark on. And that, and that the United States has been playing, a dirty role in this for a long, long time by supporting the billionaire class and, not supporting the quote, the revolution, the working people. But, it seems to me if the revolution was as effective as, as they could have been or should have been, that the people would not be in the crisis that they're in right now in Venezuela, although maybe I'm just wildly overestimating the wealth that Venezuela has. It's a mess right now, and I, like I said, I want a more complete picture too, Chris. So, did the evaluation that I laid out comport with your understanding of the situation?
No, that's basically what I've heard also, and us putting our noses in every business around the world and corrupting governments is a big problem, and we need to stop doing that also. Yeah.
There was a excellent, brilliant piece about that in the Washington Post yesterday also, which I thought was fascinating. Chris, thanks, not just specifically about Venezuela, but about the whole thing of, American foreign policy being to promote democracy at the barrel of a gun. Chris, thanks for the call. Which reminds me, of this. In fact, I wrote a chapter about this in one of my books. It's in Rebooting the American Dream, and it's called "They Will Steal It," and it's about foreign policy, and it's telling the story of one time Dick Gregory and I were flying across the Atlantic to Uganda. Ultimately, we were flying to Kenya to then pick up a plane to Uganda. This was in like 1979, I think. And we were just sitting on the plane talking, and he said, "You know what I get, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I think I got it pretty close. He says, "You know what amazes me about American foreign policy is that we think that we can run around the world and force our way of life down the throats of other people at the point of a barrel of a gun." And I said, "Yeah, it seems that way." And he said, "We don't need to do that." He said, "When you've got something good, you don't have to force it on people. They will steal it." And it just, it was just this moment of clarity for me that, if we were the shining city on the hill, to use Reagan's paraphrase of Jack Kennedy's use of Pastor Bradford's, comment from the 1690s, if we were to actually be that shining city on the hill, if we didn't have one of the worst poverty problems of the developed nations in the world, if we didn't have more uninsured people than any other country in the developed world, if we didn't have some of the worst school and educational outcomes in the developed world, if instead of having over 800 military bases all over the world and a hugely bloated military-industrial complex that sucks up about half of our military spending, largely for the profit of for-profit corporations whose CEOs live in the neighborhoods around me, around this city, in their 10 and 20 and 30 bedroom mansions with their servants' quarters attached to them. And, Thomas Frank, What's the Matter with Kansas? There's a great YouTube of him just traveling around through these neighborhoods and being chased off by the private security guards as he's trying to just film these houses. If we didn't have that, we could have better schools. We could be that shining city on the hill. And if we were that shining city on the hill, then more countries would say, we want to be like the United States. I think people admire our affluence, but I think increasingly they're not admiring our greed, or at least the greed of our ruling class and our in some ways, cultural elites, at least the right wing, the conservative cultural elites. So, we need to work on making America so good that people want to steal it, right? That they want to emulate us.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And you really can't shove your way of life down other people's throats at the barrel of a gun. We objected to that in 1776. It was what that revolution was about. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind?
Tom, thank you so much for taking my call. I just had a discussion recently with some friends about trickle-down economy, and I just wanted to get your opinion on it in the perfect world, how it's supposed to work. And did the Reagan policy, did it work when he did it? Because some of the point that my friends made is that the 90s economic boom was really a result of the Reagan trickle economy.
Well, the 90s economic boom was the result of the internet in large part. It was the development of, this is a transformational breakthrough technology that just exploded on the scene. It had nothing to do with Reaganomics. But what happened as a consequence of Reaganomics is that from the 1930s until 1980, 70% of all new wealth generated went to the bottom 90%. And from 1980 till today, the percentage of new wealth generated that went to the bottom 90% is zero. And in fact, among the African-American community, it's actually declined. It's gone below zero. So, that's what Reaganomics brought us. That's what trickle-down brought us. To the extent that there was a boom in the 90s, it was the dot-com bubble. It was, hey, there's this new technology. It's amazing. And it drove the stock market like crazy. And, of course, that popped in 2001. And, just right around the time of 9/11. And we kind of forget that, that Bush was dealing with a recession as a consequence of that. So did I answer your question, Omar?
Yes. So do you believe that if Trump decided to go that route, would it have an effect?
To go what route?
Trickle-down economy. If he cut the taxes for the top wealthy, do you think it will go down to like they said, to the rest of the people? Will they benefit?
No. Trickle-down economics has never, ever produced a benefit for the average working person. It was tried in 1920. In 1921, when Warren Harding became president, and the top tax rate in 1920 was 91% after you made what's about $3 million a year in today's dollars. And he dropped that in 1920, 21, 22, and 23. He dropped that down to 25%, where it stayed, and what they referred to that era as the Roaring 20s, right? And Republicans and libertarians will tell you, oh, the Roaring 20s, it was a great example of, trickle-down economics, Reaganomics. You cut taxes on the rich people, and everybody got rich. Well, when you actually go back and look at the numbers from the Roaring 20s, what was roaring was the stock market. What was roaring was the billionaire class. What was roaring was the consolidation of giant corporations. What was roaring was fraud in the banking sector. And the average wage of the average working person actually declined throughout the 1920s. And it didn't start rising actually until 1933 as a result of Franklin Roosevelt. So I would predict that if Donald Trump doubles down on trickle-down, he's going to get the exact same result that Sam Brownback got in Kansas 3 years ago when he did the exact same thing and said, okay, we're going to do Reaganomics in Kansas and prove that it works. And he radically cut taxes on business and on billionaires. And what happened was he had to start laying off teachers. His state, started going backwards in terms of economic development, quality of life, school outcomes. Suicides went up. People covered with health, went down. Mental health got worse. Kansas has become a basket case as a consequence of Reaganomics, and now Trump wants to do it to the United States. It's not going to produce a positive outcome, Omar. All you have to do to know that is look at, compare Kansas, 5 years ago to today. Omar, thanks a lot for the call. It's a great topic. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Julia listening to WCPT in Homewood, Illinois. Hey, Julia, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm so excited to be talking to you. I listen to you every day.
Well, thank you for calling, Julia.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make the point that another thing that happens when we're the shining hill in the world is that people want to kill you and destroy you.
But no, I don't think that's true. I don't see.
Look at what Putin is doing. He's trying to destroy us. He's working through our political parties to disenfranchise young Americans from even being interested in politics. he's worked, and it succeeded in this past election. Over half of America didn't vote.
Yeah, and over
so
half of Americans, Julia, haven't voted since the 1950s.
Really?
Yes. We have had lousy voter turnout for a century. And
I was so happy to be able to say that to people that only less than 25% of America voted for Donald Trump.
It's true. And it was also true of George W. Bush. By the way, George W. Bush lost the election by 540,000 votes to Al Gore. Something that we seem to have, dropped into the memory hole. And that he wouldn't have won Florida if it hadn't gone to the Supreme Court. And he wouldn't have gotten close enough to take it to the Supreme Court if his brother hadn't thrown 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls 3 months before the election in Florida. So, right. I mean, there's a lot of dynamics at work here. But, most of the voter suppression and the destruction of faith in the political system, in my opinion, is coming from massive amounts of negative political advertising funded by right-wing billionaires in the United States and promoted by things like Fox News and right-wing hate radio. Julie, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Jamie in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Jamie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Along some of those same lines, we're seeing an era of hyper-partisanship at all levels. Federal, state, local. We see it in Montana where you have the state rep saying the only way we can win the election is by Democrats not voting.
Right.
And I'm wondering, kind of two parts, is there a way back from this hyper-partisanship, and who is it going to take? What type of a person is it going to take to get the country back to semi-agreeable,
right.
Or are we destined to be a 2 or 3 nation country at some point down the road?
Yeah. What has happened, Jamie, is that if you look back at the era of the 40s, 50s, 40s actually, and 50s were fairly partisan. I mean, Joe McCarthy and all that kind of stuff, saying never refer to it as the Democratic Party, call it the Democrat Party and all that. But I think Eisenhower really tamped that down a lot, 52 to 1960. John Kennedy, reached across the aisle. But the difference between then and now, the big difference between then and now, is that before, arguably, certainly before 2010, But the big turning point was 1976, I believe, was the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, and then in '78 the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision. But what those decisions did is they made it possible for billionaires to own politicians in Buckley and corporations to own politics in First National Bank, and the Supreme Court basically changed the rules of politics. And so what has happened now is that we have dueling groups of elites who have been fighting for the control of political parties, particularly the Republican Party. In the Republican Party, you've got a faction which is basically wholly owned by the Koch network and their friends, the Shelley Adelson and the Koch brothers and the Mercers, and on it goes. All these right-wing billionaires. Some of them have competing interests, but most of them have a common interest in maintaining their power and their status and their wealth. And so you've got a Republican Party that is completely committed to them, to the point that, since the source of most of the Koch's wealth is fossil fuels, that they will deny climate change, for example. The Democratic Party used to be largely beholden to the labor unions. It was their principal source of economic and shoe leather support. Reagan, when Reagan came into office, about a quarter to a third of America was unionized. Now it's down to around 6% in the private sector. And Reagan's destruction of the unions made it harder for the Democratic Party to have that natural constituency. So some parts of the Democratic Party reached out to bankers and left-wing billionaires and whatnot. Hey, you gotta run a party, right? You've got to run ads. You got to be competitive. And now there's this
kind of third way that has developed within the Democratic Party that I think Sanders pioneered, which is going directly to the people. Whether that's going to work over the long term or not, I don't know. I don't know how long you can sustain that. I don't know to the extent to which Bernie was just a phenomena versus something that can be replicated in case after case after case, although I'm suspecting it's the latter. But the reason, in my opinion, we've got this extreme partisanship right now is because the parties, this isn't really a battle between the Democratic and Republican Party or even between the factions within both parties. It's really a battle between the billionaires and the corporations that are feeding those factions in those parties. You've got the billionaire faction that is nativist and neoconservative. You've got a billionaire faction that is more internationalist, and that wants Microsoft to be able to work all over the world, or Apple, or whatever it may be. And so what we're seeing is a battle that is meta to a larger battle that's pretty much invisible because the media won't report on it, because the media itself is by and large owned or controlled by these same billionaires. And that, in my opinion, is what's going on. And until we have an honest conversation about it, and which is what happened in the 1930s as a result of the system exploding after the deregulation. Harding in 1920 ran on a platform of two things: cutting taxes on the rich from 91% down to 25%, which he did. And the second one, his slogan was, in the 1920 election, less government in business, more business in government. In other words, deregulate and privatize, which they did through the 1920s, and led directly to what was referred to for 40 years in the newspaper, or 30 years anyway in the newspapers, as the Republican Great Depression of 1929. And that kind of, and that was, at that point in time, the Republican Party was owned by the billionaires of their day. And the Democratic Party was, very mixed loyalties. You had the Southern racists, you had the Northern elites, the Northern liberals, you had, it was kind of all over the map. And so both of these parties have gone through some kind of a shakeup. But what I'm seeing is these battles going on kind of behind the scenes that are really the struggles that America is facing. And until we have an honest conversation about inequality in the United States, about the distribution of wealth in the United States, about what is the purpose of government? I mean, literally, why did we create this government? I thought the founders are fairly clear about it. You can read it in the preamble of the Constitution. But many modern conservatives would totally dispute that with me. And so I think that if we're going to get back to an era where it is not so partisan that somebody like Mitch McConnell would block Merrick Garland for almost an entire year simply because he wants his guy on the Supreme Court, rather than a moderate Republican. Merrick Garland was a moderate Republican. He was recommended by Orrin Hatch. He wanted a hard right Republican in the form of Neil Gorsuch. If we're not, the only thing, in my opinion, that's going to take us back to that point where Democrats and Republicans can work together is when, instead of working for dueling groups of billionaires and corporations, they're working for we the people, which is going to mean overturning these Supreme Court decisions.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from ADD Success Stories, a guide for fulfillment to fulfillment for families with attention deficit disorder. And it's really individuals as well. And most of this, the book is well over 100 individual stories about ways that people have learned how to be successful in life and just sharing them with others. A lot of these came from when I ran the ADD forum on CompuServe, and a lot of these are, other people's stories from CompuServe, some of them from when Louise was coaching, when we were running the community for ADHD kids, all kinds of stuff. So anyhow, this is from chapter 5, page 47, titled Learning How to Handle Criticism and Self-Criticism. And it opens with a quote from Benjamin Disraeli in 1860. He said, "It's much easier to be critical than to be correct." One of the most common and recurring strategies that successful hunters, that's people with ADD, tell about is how they've learned to handle criticism. A successful ADD entrepreneur tells the story of how devastated he was in a high school presentation that he'd spent the better part of 2 months on for English class. He read dozens of books, dug out arcane facts, sifted through quotes and stories and information, all to find what he thought was the absolutely perfect summary to make his point. With great enthusiasm, he pulled an all-nighter, writing the final paper, and marched off to school the next day with his head high and the smell of academic victory in his nostrils. At 2 o'clock, he walked into his English classroom and marched up to the teacher's desk, a paper in his hand. "Here it is," he said, and handed it to her with a dramatic flourish. She took one glance at it, leaned over the side of the desk, and dropped it into the wastebasket. "You didn't double spaces," she said. "When are you going to learn to read the directions?" Stunned, he began to protest. To tell her about the hours of work he'd done, she shook her head as if shaking his words out of her ears and interrupted him, saying, "You have to learn how to do things right. This will be a good lesson for you. I'm giving you an F for that paper, and there's no appeal because today was the last day you could hand it in." He went home that night and at the ripe old age of 14 cried himself to sleep. "I learned 2 important lessons from that experience," he told me 20 years later. The first was that I needed to slow down, to force myself to read directions. In that regard, it was probably a positive experience. But it also almost destroyed my commitment to her, to the class, to the school, and to any future academic achievement. And that was where I learned my second and most important lesson. When you fall down, stand back up, dust yourself off, and carry on. That sounds easy, I said, but how do you do it? How do you go from being angry about her, from blaming her, or for that matter, from blaming yourself? "I have a picture in my mind," he said, "of a man who's walking down a dusty rural road. He trips on a stone and falls face first into the dirt. Then he reaches over to the side of the road, grabs a stick, and begins to beat himself over the head with a stick, yelling at himself about how stupid he was to trip and fall. Between these comments, he's cursing the stone for being there and blaming it for tripping him. That's absurd, isn't it? But that's just what many people do. And when I imagine that picture and I see how absurd it is to wallow in self-blame, I feel empowered to get on with my life." End of quote. Unfortunately, the absurd behavior that this entrepreneur described is just what so many people do, particularly those who've spent their lives feeling like they've never quite lived up to their potential. They respond to criticism first by blaming the critic and then by beating themselves up. They rationalize the former by taking a debating position, finding flaws in the criticism or the critic, and then rationalize the latter by telling themselves that if they beat themselves up emotionally, they'll learn from the experience. In real life, it rarely works that way. People who pursue this strategy instead to say and free speech at Berkeley and whatnot.
I've never been a fan of Anne's. She definitely was the first wave of the outrage commentary on the right. She does what she's going to do. I want to start today, actually, with the tweet of the day from me was The Onion today, which had their tweet this morning was Berkeley on lockdown when random sheets of the Wall Street Journal are found on a park bench. That's a great one. So lighthearted way to start. But what's happening out in Berkeley is they're having a hard time grappling with this creature that they've created. The sort of the left groupthink that has been created on college campuses has now the monster's gotten away from them, and now they don't know how to put it back in the bottle or the genie back in the bottle, because that's all. If you say you're for 100% free speech, which conservatives will demand it too. It's not just for liberals. Right. And so they're having a hard time. I think they're going to end up working it out, but, and finding a place for her. It sounds like she's being obstinate. The latest reporting is that she's not agreeing to their new location for safety reasons, and that she's going to go on her same day. Who knows how it's going to end up.
Yeah. Well, Anne is a creature of the media. She's going to milk this for all she can. She's promoting her own brand as much as she's promoting the ideas that she's speaking
the
about.
The problem with these agitators, specifically before I turn to the agitators on the right that we talked about before we went live, the agitators on the left they're kind of like terrorists in that they have 100% failure rate. When the Milo Yiannopoulos incident happened and there were violent outbreaks, mainstream America is outraged by that. People in the Midwest don't want to send their kids to California to go to school if they're going to have to be worried about there being violent protests on a college campus because some guy that says crazy stuff wants to come and speak.
Yeah.
I think the short-term solution, or maybe it's a longer-term solution to this, something when we pivot to what we agree on, is each one of these conservative speakers need to ask someone like you, someone like Rachel Maddow, to go with them. There needs to be a discussion, not just talking at these students. We need to have a debate. And so we need leaders on the left to challenge the Ann Coulters of the world, the Milos of the world, to do it together so that students see it. Colleges are critically important for young people to create and learn and become adults.
Yeah, for years I did this in Chicago. Our station, WCPT in Chicago, used to sponsor this every year. Michael Medved and I, we would let in 500 people from the station that he was on, and we'd let in 500 people from WCPT, the station I was on, and put 1,000 people in an auditorium. We split them down the middle, right? Cheering sections,
or maybe mix them in.
And we called it the Great Debate. And they live on in YouTube. There's several, half a dozen of them or so. But and I always found it useful, not just as theater, but as dialogue. But I'm not sure that Milos or Ann would have any interest in having that kind of conversation.
No, they're entertainers.
And it goes beyond that.
But people like Hugh Hewitt, you and Hugh Hewitt sitting down on a college campus and having a 1 to 2 hour debate about the important issues of the day, that would change students' lives. It really would. It'd make them go home and think.
Sure, I'm all in favor of that. But that's not what's happening.
Right.
What's happening is we've got people. Milos had a book coming out. He was hustling the book, and it was the week that the book was coming out that he was going to be in Berkeley. And there's a lot of speculation and perhaps some evidence that the provocations were actually being generated by people on Milos' side just to get the publicity for his book, to turn him into this national figure. And Ann Coulter, I wouldn't put anything past her, or not necessarily her, the people around her. It's just it's like. Now that it has become big business to be to be politically active, there's a whole different dynamic at work here, Brian. And I remember sitting with my dad watching Firing Line, William Buckley's old show. There was always respectful debate between conservatives and Republicans, or for that matter, John McLaughlin into the modern era just until recently.
Sure.
With the McLaughlin Report, those kind of dialogues, it seems like. Nobody really wants to pay attention to, and and that concerns me.
There's two problems. There's the problem that punditry or conservative or liberal thought has become big business, either touting the books, whatever. But also there's the problem of the protests, that protesters don't seem to, or we're quickly getting to a point where protesters can't protest their own side peacefully, where there's provocation, whether it's on the left or the right, that oftentimes turns into violence. I think the police that are tasked with protecting the First Amendment and everyone's ability to protest, speak freely, they need to take a playbook out of the abortion protests of the 1990s, where the police in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas, learned through that some long summer of mercy that just tore the city apart, that it is okay and it's not a violation of people's free speech rights to separate the protesters.
Right.
That people get, pro-abortion folks get one side of the street, anti-abortion folks get another side of the street. And creating that space in between the two groups, I think, keeps some of the violence that we saw down in Jacksonville from actually happening.
Yeah.
It's the police's responsibility to both protect the First Amendment, but also protect the people protesting.
What do you do when you're the speaker and there are people in the audience committed to disrupting you? It seems at that point that you say, okay, if your goal to be here is just to disrupt, then it's not inappropriate to have security walk you out.
Sure. Either side. I think that's happened in various times.
Yeah, from Bernie rallies to Trump rallies.
Absolutely.
Although Trump stands up there and says, "Hey, get him out of here! Yeah, I'll pay the legal fees if you beat him up."
I'll be intrigued to see as he starts campaigning for in 18 and 19 for re-election, whether those rallies have that same.
He's campaigning right now,
Yeah, of course.
He
Certainly
declared the campaign the day that he was inaugurated, so that they can use the money to all these public events that they're doing. You have to be a donor to get in, which is why everybody applauds him. Which is and again, the media is not characterizing that accurately. They're not pointing that out, which troubles me. But anyway, so yeah, we've got to figure out what to do about this. I'm curious to your thoughts on Jason Chaffetz. I'm seeing all these conspiracy theories floating around. The guy voted against increasing security for Benghazi, and then Benghazi happened. And in fact, he voted to hire a cheap British firm to provide the security. That, frankly, he was never held accountable for that vote. And it's just now coming out, I guess, in a big way. And he turned, his whole career was on trashing Hillary Clinton over Benghazi. And he's supposed to be the one who's overseeing, malefactors, bad behavior in government. He's in charge of House oversight. Shouldn't he be the one who's investigating the Trump administration? And is his unwillingness to do that why he's bailing out of politics?
I think the best reporting on this, I think there's a lot of conspiracy theories on the left. The best reporting I've seen so far, and it's a fluid situation, obviously, is that this is all about money. I mean, he practically admitted it, that he had talked to some TV people, and the quote from some sources that came back, I don't know what the source
is. Will pay him $1 million a year.
Well, the quote was come back to us when you're serious.
Right.
So then he announces that he's retiring, and so he's serious now. I think he's monetizing his position, and we could probably spend 3 weeks on your program talking about the monetization of
I think that's one of the great crises that we have, is that members of Congress know that if they vote the right way, that when they leave Congress, I mean, in this town, if you were a sitting member of Congress for more than a couple of terms, you walk into $1 million a year job. If you were a sitting member of the Senate, you walk into a $5 million a year job. If you simply were a high-level congressional staffer, you walk into a $400,000 a year job. That wildly distorts our politics. We got 90 seconds, Brian. What do we do about that?
I think we need to have a discussion about whether I'm not for them, but the nation needs to talk about term limits.
But term limits just strengthen the power of the lobbyists because they become the institutional structure.
I agree. That's why I'm against them.
Okay.
But we need to talk about them. I think we also need to absolutely be transparent about what people are doing. I think lobbyists are important. Lobbyists are important because they represent different interests. There are lobbyists for Planned Parenthood. There are lobbyists for pro-life organizations. It's not just business lobbyists. There are lobbyists for green energy.
No, I get all that, and it could be a good Democrat who's looking to make $1 million a year working for Elon Musk. I don't know, but it just seems wrong that it's even happening. And
let's not forget context. There are people on Wall Street making $20, $30, $40 million a year. The wealth in Washington, when you compare it to Los Angeles, the Hollywood scene, Silicon Valley, Wall Street.
We now have the richest suburbs in the country.
Yes, but that's per capita. That's not. Right. But in terms of Washington, it's going to sound Republican, but that's small potatoes money compared to what big business makes, whether it's Wall Street, Silicon Valley or Hollywood.
But they're making it. Please do. Okay, but they're doing that so much out of. If we invest $1 million in this politician, and they change the legislation, we'll make $100 million.
I don't think we should ever. Let's keep in mind that we should never force people to live in poverty to be in public service.
No, I don't. I agree with that. But $200,000 a year is not poverty.
No, certainly not.
Brian Pruitt, contributor to Red State, redstate.com. You can tweet him at Brian Pruitt, BRYAN PRUITT.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back with your calls and more of the news of the day after this. And welcome back. Joe in Charlotte, Tennessee, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Okay, well, on the voter suppression, cross-check. I've seen numbers of 7 million that were possibly removed from the voter rolls.
I think the total number of people on the cross-check list was, according to Greg Palast, was around 7 million. I think the number that they removed was less than 2, but I could be wrong, Joe.
Even 2.
Yeah.
That's an average of a small city in the United States, an entire city of voters, basically, that weren't allowed to vote, which probably maybe would have made a difference. I don't know.
I think it would have. It certainly did in Florida in 2000.
Oh, yeah. Well, what I really wanted to say about that, though, Tom, is maybe us as voters, we need to do a little more due diligence and verify that we are registered, and then try and find out, if you're not registered, then see if you can get them to give you a good reason of why you're not registered.
Yeah.
Here in Tennessee, you register at the DMV.
Mm-hmm.
You get your driver's license. They ask you, do you want to register to vote? You can say yes, no. But now I'm assuming. I mean, I voted for Hillary, but I'm assuming that I'm registered until I renew that driver's license.
Well, that's the theory.
So now,
that's the theory.
Right. And I know that years ago when I voted for Jimmy Carter up in Wisconsin, I mean, I registered right that night when I voted. Mm-hmm. Or right at the poll. So, but if we were to go in there, and I mean, it seems to me that would be grounds for a hell of a lot of lawsuits. If you think you're registered, and then they can't give you a good reason why you're not.
Yeah. Well, here's the problem, Joe. Because at the birth of our country, the majority of human beings on this continent were not able to vote. They were Native Americans, they were African Americans, they were women.
Right.
In some states, they were even white men who were not landholders. That not all states. I mean, there were in the first years of the American Republic, there actually were states that allowed women to vote and allowed people of color to vote. But that all changed, pretty much completely by 1820. And so as a consequence of that, when the Constitution was written in 1787, ratified in 1789, there is no provision in there that gives an absolute right to vote to Americans, because they didn't want to do that, because they were actively preventing more than half of Americans from voting. And so we've inherited this, and along with the Electoral College, which was a way of letting the slave states have more representation, That and the 3/5 compromise, those were the two things that kept the slave states into the compact to create the United States. And these vestiges of essentially slavery and white male supremacy continue to haunt us to this day. And until we confront them head on, and until we just come right out and say, this Republican voter suppression efforts are directed in large part toward people of color and minorities in the United States who tend to vote Democratic, and that's why they're doing it, and that's why they're lying to us about voter fraud and all this other nonsense. We're not going to move very much farther. Joe, thanks a lot for the call. Well said. Great issue. Nucci Courier is with us right after the sticker. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's 25 minutes past the hour, and Nucci Courier is on the line with us. The president of the National Women's Democratic Club. The democraticwomen.org is the website. You can tweet her at Nucci, Nucchhi. I am pronouncing your name correct, am I?
Yes, you absolutely are. And it's actually Democratic Woman. It's singular.
Oh, okay.
.org. Yeah.
So, okay. Democratic Woman. Actually, yes, I have it there correctly. Thank you. So you have an event coming up Monday night, 6 to 9 p.m. here in Washington, D.C. And I thought this was this is number one, a cool event. It's an interesting thing. And number two, it is the sort of thing I thought people should know about because they might want to be doing something like this in their own neighborhood. So please tell us about it.
So the genesis of this is that we have had this influx of young women who are potential and aspiring activists who don't know what to do because they are so steamed up about what's going on. After Hillary Clinton's defeat and after the ascent of all these white male Neanderthals who are trying to reverse, and I'm sorry I'm using very strong language, who are trying to reverse all the good that's been done in terms of women's rights, minority rights, and all kinds of other regulatory issues. People are trying to figure out what to do, how to congregate. So there are these little huddles which have formed post-March, the Women's March on Washington. We had become the hub of the Women's March in Washington, and we have had 25 to 30 young women joining our club on a monthly basis for the past 4 or 5 months. And they all want to be active and they want to be engaged in the political process. They want their voices heard. And we are trying to keep that going. And so on the 24th, which is Monday, we have what we are calling a resistance marketplace, where organizations like the DFA, the DNC, and all manner of other organizations, activist organizations, are setting up tables to meet and greet and inform the participants who are going to be there. And then we training sessions set up, 7 or 8 training sessions for all these young people. And we are expecting hundreds of these young activists to show up because they're all looking for direction. They're all looking for a place to congregate.
Nucci, forgive my interruption, but we have less than, I just got the cue, we have less than a minute.
Okay.
We're talking with Nucci Courier. democraticwoman.org is the website. Is the Democratic Women's National Democratic Club, the Women's National Democratic Club, you have offices or chapters around the country, right?
We actually don't.
So do you want to, or do you want other people to do what you're doing?
We have out-of-state members. We have non-resident members, but they all feed into our main office, which is here.
I see. So you're trying to bring people to Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And would you encourage women in other cities to do the same thing you're doing?
Absolutely, because I think this is the only way to go. We need to encourage these young people who suddenly, after eons, have woken up to the fact that they need to safeguard the rights that their mothers and grandmothers won for them. And we need to make sure that this energy doesn't dissipate.
Yeah, amen. Nucci Courier, the president of the Women's National Democratic Club. The website is democraticwoman.org. And you can tweet her at Nucci, N-U-C-H-H-I, or at WNDC_1922, which is the club itself's Twitter account. Nucci, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great speaking. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls. More of the news of the day right after this. Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Rebooting the American Dream, from the introduction. It's titled Back to the Future. On April 14th, 1789, George Washington was out walking through the fields at Mount Vernon, his home in Virginia, when Charles Thomson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress, rode up on horseback. Thomson had a letter for Washington from the President pro tem of the new constitutionally created United States Senate, telling Washington that he'd just been elected president, and the inauguration was set for April 30th in the nation's capital, New York City. This created two problems for George Washington. The first was saying goodbye to his 82-year-old mother, which the 57-year-old Washington did that night. She gave him her blessing and told him it was the last time he'd see her alive, as she was gravely ill, and indeed she died before he returned from New York. The second problem was finding a suit of clothes made in the United States of America. For that, he sent a courier to his old friend and fellow general from the American Revolutionary War, Henry Knox. Washington couldn't find a suit made in America because in the years prior to the American Revolution, the British East India Company, whose tea was thrown into the Boston harbor by outraged colonists after the Tea Act of 1773 gave the world's largest transnational corporation a giant tax break. But the British East India Tea Company controlled the manufacture and the transportation of a whole range of goods, including fine clothing. Cotton and wool could be grown and sheared in the colonies, but it had to be sent to England to be turned into clothing. This was a routine policy for England, and it's why until India achieved its independence in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi, who was assassinated a year later, sat at his spinning wheel for his lectures and daily spun clothing in his own home. It was, like his Salt March, a protest against the colonial practices of England and an entreaty to his fellow Indians to make their own clothes to gain independence from British companies and institutions, even though making their own clothes or making their own salt was against British law. Fortunately for George Washington, an American clothing company had been established on April 28, 1783 in Hartford, Connecticut, by a man named Daniel Hinsdale. And it produced high-quality woolen and cotton clothing, as well as items made from imported silk. It was to Hinsdale's company that Knox turned, and he helped Washington get, in time for his inauguration 2 weeks later, a nice but not excessively elegant brown American-made suit. He wore British black later for the celebration and the most famous painting, but he was sworn in wearing an American-made suit. When Washington became president in 1789, most of America's personal and industrial products of any significance were manufactured in England or in other British colonies. Washington asked his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, what could be done about that, and Hamilton came up with an 11-point plan to foster American manufacturing, which he presented to Congress in 1791. By 1793, most of its points had either been made into law by Congress or formulated into policy by either President Washington or the various states, which put our country on a path of developing its industrial base and generating the largest source of federal revenue for more than 100 years. Those strategic proposals built the greatest industrial powerhouse the world had ever seen. And after more than 200 successful years, Alexander Hamilton's program was only abandoned during the administrations of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, and remained abandoned to this day. Modern-day China, however, implemented most of Hamilton's plan just in the 1990s, and has brought about a remarkable transformation of its nation in a single generation. Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers is a primary inspiration for this book. It was part of a larger work titled Alexander Hamilton's Report on the Subject of Manufactures, made in his capacity as Secretary of the Treasury. It's the official title. And then I list Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers.
And I'll share just the headlines of this. He starts out by saying, a full view now having been taken to the inducements to the promotion of manufacturers in the United States, in other words, why we should do this, accompanied with an examination of the principal objections, which are commonly urged in opposition. This was Jefferson's objection that he didn't want America to be a manufacturing nation. He wanted us to be an agricultural nation. Hamilton says, it is proper in the next place to consider the means by which it may be effected. So here he says, in order to a better judgment of the means proper to be presented to the United States, it will be of use to advert to those which have been employed with success in other countries. In other words, they're stealing this idea from England. It was called the Tudor Plan when King Henry VII came up with it. So number one, protecting duties, import taxes, now called tariffs, or duties on those foreign articles which are the rivals of domestic ones intended to be encouraged. So number one, raise the cost of imported goods. Number two, prohibition of rival articles or duties equivalent to prohibitions. On some things that we think it's really important to make in America, make the duties, the tariffs, so high that nobody would want to import them. So there'll be a strong domestic manufacturing presence. Three, prohibitions on the exportation of materials of manufacture. Why provide raw materials to other countries, like we're doing right now to China, to make stuff to sell back to us when we can simply make it here, manufacture it here? Number four, pecuniary bounties. This is one of the most efficacious means of encouraging manufacturers, basically, subsidizing growing and new nascent industries. So that's just up to number four. There are 11 points. The rest of it's all in the book, Rebooting the American Dream, and you can find it online.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. What a fascinating Friday. That's Anything Goes Friday, by the way, whatever you'd like to talk about. Tiffany in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Tiffany, what's on your mind?
Hello, and thank you for accepting my call. I just want to say that whole conversation about free speech was really taken from the perspective, I think, of privilege. Because let's be frank about Ann Coulter. She says things that are quite offensive, and to me, as a person of color, that threatening. So I have every right to protest her coming to speak somewhere because her language is incendiary, and to someone else, it is threatening. And I don't blame the university. This isn't about, they shut her down out of free speech. There's consequences. Yes, you have free speech, but there are consequences. And the university understands that her incendiary rhetoric can lead to violence. Just because you can say it doesn't mean there won't be a negative consequence. And another thing, I am getting really tired of older white men telling me what I can do with my body, but still claiming the, oh, woe is me, I'm disenfranchised. You know what? When your parents have to sit you down and give you the talk so you don't die accidentally, innocently, because a policeman thinks you're possibly violent, when your parents sit you down at the age of 8 and tell you you have to be cream of the crop just to be okay, just to be thought to be able to possibly get through the door, then you can get your disenfranchisement card. But I have no sympathy for people who didn't get their education, didn't follow up on the times and the changing with globalization and the market and making sure that they were properly skilled, that they got left behind. Lots of people got left behind. Lots of people are angry and sad and upset, but we didn't sit up there and vote for someone who groped women and has a vocabulary that a 3-year-old, I know 3-year-olds that say, Mommy, I'm frustrated that I didn't get to play with Paw Patrol today. That 3-year-old has better cognitive skills and articulation than the President of the United States.
Tragically.
Thank you.
Yeah, great rant, Tiffany. And I absolutely agree with your concerns about privilege. I was going to point out that Berkeley has now reinstituted their invitation to Ann Coulter. And the question is, in my mind, if Ann Coulter or Milos or anybody, any of these right-wingers who the subtext of their message is one of disenfranchisement and sanctioning violence, if not state violence, then even individual violence, then how do we most appropriately deal with that? And that's a conversation. I would have loved to have heard Tiffany's thoughts on that, but she hung up the phone. Chelsea in Lake Forest, Washington. Hey, Chelsea, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. So I was just calling because I've organized an event along with some other people that I think is going to be really productive for the progressive community. Next Saturday, April 29th from 10 to 2 at Nathan Hale High School, we are hosting a volunteer service fair. We have over 20 different nonprofits that are coming together that work on all kinds of issues from homelessness to healthcare, pretty much everything on the progressive gamut, because we really just want people to have an opportunity to turn their energy and their rage right now into actual productive action. And, pretty much no matter what your issue is, the odds are there is some group out there that is working on it. So I just wanted to promote, have a chance to give a little plug for our event. You can find it on Facebook.com/IRE, I-R-E, Volunteer Service Fair. IRE stands for Ignite, Resist, Engage.
Okay.
And it's a really easy, excuse me, I'm a little nervous. It's a really easy event to organize. We just started reaching out to nonprofits. We picked a date, and I really think it's something that could happen all over the country and really be a great chance to get people to find ways to get more involved.
That's great, Chelsea. What one more time, the Facebook pages.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a little nervous. It's IRE, I-R-E, Volunteer Service Fair, and that's F-A-I-R. And again, IRE stands for Ignite, Resist, Engage. And it's April 29th, next Saturday from 10 to 2 at Nathan Hale High School.
Cool.
Seattle.
Okay. Thank you, Chelsea. Thanks for the call and good luck. Let us know how it works out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Kevin in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Kevin. Thanks for listening to KTRC. What's up?
Well, I wanted to disagree with you about the media ever reporting fairly on what's going on in the United States, whether it's the corporate malfeasance or what's actually happening in our government. And the thing that I want to do is to turn it around with Obama's speech and what he said about be the change you want to be, and that the coming media is going to be us with these smartphones that we all have. Remember how inspirational it was as they were making videos in Iran during the Green Revolution, or we were getting videos from other hot spots around the world. And it's people with their cell phones and the new media to come. And I think you and Norm Goldman are going to teach us how and help us lead the way. Maybe people like that and the Seattle low-power FM people will help us get our voice back up there, because you are right about the media controlled by the corporation, but we can be the media we want to be.
Yeah, I'm just astonished that there's this major tour going on with Bernie Sanders and Tom Perez, the head of the DNC, and one of the two Democratic presidential candidates in the last election cycle, and they're drawing huge crowds. I mean, thousands of people. And they're going through red states. They were in Kentucky day before yesterday in Mitch McConnell's state, calling out Mitch McConnell. And to the best of my knowledge, now I don't, I'm sitting in front of 2 monitors here for about 5-6 hours every day for this radio show. 3 hours of show prep and then 3 hours doing the show, and watching CNN and MSNBC. I don't have the sound on, but I can see what's going on. And Louise and I will catch the news at night when I get home, but. I saw no mention of any of that, and that's just for example. This is not a it's all about Bernie, but there's this media blackout on any solid progressive stuff going on in the country, and there always has been. And I was listening to NPR the other day, and they had well, actually no, it wasn't NPR. It was I'm sorry, this was Morning Joe. And, Cokie Roberts was on, and, who's one of her parents was a senator, as I recall. And Joe, of course, is a congressman. Mika's dad worked in the Clinton or the Carter administration, all basically in the Beltway, insiders, sitting around talking about how important it is to not even talk about, for example, having a progressive primary Heidi Heitkamp. Well,
I'm not from her state. I don't have an opinion on that. I generally think you don't want to put progressive challenges against your own people if they're already in office, unless they are just really screwing up bad. But the point is that the discussion is always held within this little bubble of what they refer to, at least for the Democrats, as the middle, which is really not the middle. It's the right. It's what used to be the Republican Party. And on the Republican side, they're ignoring the obscenity, the malfeasance, the outrageous conduct that is being done right now by Jason Chaffetz, whose job is to investigate what's going on in the White House and is refusing to do so. I mean, he was perfectly willing to do it when it was Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. Oh, boy, we got to investigate this all day, every day, and nothing but. But investigate Trump? Oh, no, we can't do that. These guys are not doing their jobs, and they need to be held to account. But the media is not even telling us about it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And the corporate media is certainly not going to be talking about issues like net neutrality, selling your internet browser status, or corporate conglomerates forming. And welcome back. Let's see here. Corky, watching Free Speech TV in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, been a while since I've heard from you. What's up?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I lived under the 63 nuclear threat of the Soviet Union. We got tired of scrambling underneath our desks.
Yeah.
And now these guys in here, the Sessions and Trump, they're poking at the bee's nest again. And it seems a little more dangerous this time.
I agree. And my personal sense of it, Corky, is that we are in a position right now worldwide not all that different from where the world was in 1916, 1917. That a single spark, like in, I think it was 1917, wasn't it, that Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, which triggered World War I, that a single spark, whether it would be a military confrontation with North Korea, whether it would be some sort of confrontation with Russia in Syria, whether it would be a confrontation with China over the Spratly Islands or some other variation thereof, over the rights to the South China Sea, or something that's not even on our radar right now. The war in Yemen, for example, which is really a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is really a proxy war between Shia Islam and Sunni Islam. Whether if or when any of this stuff, it becomes the igniter that leads us to World War III. I am very concerned about it, and I'm particularly concerned about it because it does not seem like this administration has any coherent foreign policy, that they're making it up as they go along, and that you're getting multiple. It's like, oh yeah, we're going to set a carrier group to scare North Korea. Well, it turns out that they're not. It's going the opposite direction. The Navy doesn't know what the president is saying. The president doesn't know what the security advisor. It's just it's a bumble mess. It concerns me, Corky. I share your concern. And it's why I think that we need to get ready for the 2018 election and clean this thing up.
Well, yes, we had a steady hand at the wheel for the most part of the elections through the 50s.
Yeah.
Till now.
Yeah.
But at this point, we don't have any hand on the wheel.
Well, it seems, or we have multiple hands on the wheel. That's my concern, is you've got, and we're watching these factions. I mean, you've got the Steve Bannon faction in the White House, which is saying, don't be interventionist. So he had to be opposed to the Tomahawk missiles going into Syria, and he had to be opposed to the threatening of North Korea. You would think, I mean, if Steve Bannon's position and philosophy is actually coherent and consistent, and I suspect it actually is, and then you've got the neoconservatives, in the White House, the Republicans, the John Boltons. I mean, he doesn't have an official position, but he represents that, I think, quite well. And many of the people on Fox News who are just, who are shilling for the military-industrial complex, which is looking at, hey, if we can have a war anywhere, we can make another $100 billion. You know, there's money to be made out there. And so let's get a war going, guys. Come on. Start picking on Iran. Start picking on North Korea. Start, try pushing China. Push Russia a little bit more. All this kind of stuff. And it's in the lack of a philosophical containment for it all, I think we're at extreme risk. Corky, thanks a lot for the call. Great to hear from you. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Tom, this is like always a treat to just share everything with you.
Well, thank you, George.
Yeah, because like I was telling your the guy who answers.
Yeah, Nate, our call screener.
Right.
An associate producer.
I studied the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita, and in the 60s, I was born 1940, so my search for myself, for my spiritual enlightenment, led me to the Vedas and the Bhagavad Gita and Vedanta, and I lived as a monk for a couple of years in a temple, and it has given me, through my meditation, I was listening to you earlier when you was reading from your book that your meditation and your insight that you get from just being alone with yourself, that's where the truest guidance come from. Yeah. And so, the leaders are really one. You have to get it from yourself so you can understand the truth. But what I wanted to share with you was something that I'm gifted by, because I also studied with, I'm sure you probably know this because you're so knowing, Oscar Brown Jr.
I don't know Oscar Brown Jr.
You don't know. He was a great poet and songwriter from Chicago. He wrote, Watermelon Man and
oh my,
yeah, that's and songs like that. I don't want to go all into it, but I want to share with you something that I was given. It's hard to explain this thing sometimes. It's so much happening, it evades my grasp. How this phenomena changes and rearranges and goes on. Infinite, but that's me. I'm trying to do it. You see, it said, I'm a poet. Well, I'm blessed. And that I'm a black man. Could you guess? It's my nature at best, but still it's hard to explain. Sometimes, when I find myself hurting and forgetting the reasons why. I used to be in the dark, but not now. I cry, it's electric. The light's burning my eyes. But this could distract me. The created confusion that abounds in gross intensity. It's like believing a rope to be a snake. And if you move, he'll strike. Your life's at stake. It's an illusion that casts this mirage across your path. How sad. And once more, this living dream becomes a drag.
That's remarkable.
Hard to explain. Sometimes it's funny, like they say.
George, I have to. Generally we ask people not to read on the air, but that was one of the most brilliant poetry readings I've heard in years and years and years. I do have to move along though, because Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News is with us. But George, thank you for calling and sharing that with us. I appreciate it, and I truly do. Let's check in with Talk Media News, brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do, The Elements of a Great Working Life. On the line with us, Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Hey, Patrick, what's going on in the world today?
I don't have nearly as nice a voice as your previous caller, though.
Oh, wasn't that brilliant?
Disappointment.
Wasn't that brilliant? He's
excellent. Yeah. What's happening in Washington is kind of, I feel like this is Groundhog Day again, which is that Republican leaders and President Trump himself are insisting that another round of repeal and replace will actually happen. Republicans are now saying that they would like to resurrect a Republican bill on health care before Trump's 100th day in office, which I believe is at the end of next week. Politico published sort of the latest version of the proposal, which would maintain a lot of the popular parts of President Obama's signature domestic achievement, like guaranteed coverage, maternity care, preserving the health law's ban on insurers with pre-existing medical conditions. The real trouble with this is that when Congress returns from their sort of spring break next Monday, one of the bigger things that they're going to have to do is not really health care, but preventing the federal government from running out of money. And that's going to be a really, really tricky thing when you factor in health care, when you factor in military spending, when you factor in the border wall that Trump has proposed, and you factor in the fact that unlike some other issues on Trump's agenda, this is one that he really does need Democratic votes for. This can't just be a singular Republican issue, and getting Republican votes is going to be really difficult for him without making some concessions that could ultimately lead to him reversing some of his campaign promises. So
well, they can pass budgets by reconciliation, can't they? I mean, isn't there an awful lot that they could do with regard to taxes and for that matter, what they call health care? And by the way, the big caveat on this stuff, if I'm reading this right, is that yes, they're keeping all of Obamacare's, the things that even Republicans love about Obamacare, no pre-existing conditions, and they can't throw you off once you get sick and all that kind of stuff. They're actually allowing the states to waive all those rules if they choose to, which is going to create a real patchwork quilt of bizarre, if you live in one state, you have a whole different experience than if you live in another state. Doesn't seem like a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. I mean, there's also this classic quote from Trump on the healthcare plan, which to be honest, we should have your previous caller read, which is, quote, "The plan gets better and better and better, and it's gotten really, really good, and a lot of people are liking it a lot."
Right. Yeah, whatever that means. But with regard to the budget, you said that he's going to have Democratic votes, and I thought that budgets that are at least neutral, that don't add to the national debt, and maybe that's the kicker. Maybe they can't do a budget that doesn't add to the national debt, if they're going to cut taxes on billionaires and things like that. But the budgets that were at least neutral could be passed by reconciliation, which means that they cannot be filibustered in the Senate, and Republicans control the House and Senate. Or is it that they're going to need Democratic votes because the Freedom Caucus is going to peel off?
Yeah, I think that's part. Part of Trump's biggest problem, pretty much, you go across the board. This is on healthcare. This is on immigration. This is on budget and taxes. Is the Freedom Caucus? It's the fact that his party is in this sort of internal civil war between hardline conservatives and more moderates. And the Freedom Caucus, they feel emboldened. They feel absolutely zero pressure to join the party. In fact, probably most Americans even know what the Freedom Caucus was until Trump came into office. And now,
well, it used to be called the Tea Party Caucus. I've always called it the Cokehead Caucus because most of its infrastructure has been funded by the Coke network.
Yeah, and now they're just more mainstream, and they have seats in Congress, and they now can control the agenda. I mean, there is this whole string of thought which if I were Trump, I kind of might agree with, which is just tell the Freedom Caucus, come up with a health care plan that you like and that you also think has a chance of passing the House, because if it doesn't have a chance of passing the House, what's the point? And just go along with it, because as you and I have discussed before, Trump's heart's not in this. Trump doesn't. I think Trump, in the end of the day, just wants to apply a couple tweaks to Obamacare so he can say he did something to it, so he can say it's Trump care, and he wants to move on. His heart is. I don't think any Republican's heart's into this, especially given the fact that, let's say they spend another month wrestling over this, and then let's say they have another kind of embarrassing failure again.
I think he's trying to check the boxes. I understand there's a whiteboard over, near the Oval Office with a list of Trump's campaign promises, and they want to check these boxes off. And And it's like he's pretending he can do it by executive order, but the executive orders are, by and large, meaningful and powerless. You need actual legislation. And to the best of my knowledge, nothing of any consequence has gotten through Congress so far. I mean, they passed a law allowing the mining companies to dump more waste in the rivers. They passed a law, making it harder for the government to test for fecal matter in the water. But that's it.
Well, don't tell Trump that. I mean, he just said that no other president in American history has had a more productive 90 days.
Right. Yeah, he should read about Franklin Roosevelt's first term.
Right.
Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Thank you, Patrick.
You bet. Take care.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. Professor Kenneth Surin is going to be with us. We're going to be talking. It's very interesting about Jeremy Corbyn.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction, a book about extinction. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in our atmosphere, trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000-year history of the human race. We are on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a very different place from the one currently cradling us. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, and agricultural collapse, they're all taking place right now. And it's going to get worse. But now other voices have entered the fray. Those of geologists who study the longer-term implications and histories of a planet undergoing rapid global warming. Specifically, they are focused on extinctions. The climate scientists, geologists, and those from related scientific disciplines need to continue talking to each other because at some point we may be able to see the critical moment in which the current climate crosses from the realm of a global destabilizer to a global extinction event. We must wake up. It's hard to imagine life without Earth. We take the vast variety of life on this planet and even our own existence for granted. But numerous times in our planet's history, life as we know it has come close to disappearing entirely. We call these events mass extinctions, and we even teach school children about those times of great death on our planet. For example, we know that long ago on a much more unstable planet, the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid striking the Earth. This leads many people to believe that as long as we don't see an asteroid hurtling toward the planet, all is well. But this is not rational thinking for several reasons. The asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs and started a major mass extinction is the only event having to do with outer space that we can trace with any certainty. And new science indicates that the asteroid impact itself wasn't what killed the dinosaurs. It was the global warming that followed it. New science has discovered a common theme in all of the extinctions in the past, and it's woven right into the global fabric of today as yet another mass extinction threatens our planet. That global consistent thread is global warming. We have had 6 extinctions in the billion-year history of life on our planet. Each sharp spike in the chart below indicates one of these mass extinctions. There's a chart on the page. Occurring about 450 million years ago, the Ordovician / Silurian mass extinction devastated marine life, which at the time dominated the planet. In a series of 2 extinctions, 60 and 70% of all life on the planet was taken, respectively. Then, fewer than 100 million years later, the planet was rocked again. The Denovian period was capped off by a 20 million year death march that killed off 70% of life on Earth. This included many coral reefs, which didn't return for another 100 million years. We know of the KT extinction, the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction, which occurred 65 million years ago, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. There was also an extinction event 200 million years ago, known as the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. But none of these extinctions explains the huge spike shown in the center of the previous chart. That one happened 250 million years ago and was the worst mass extinction of species event in the history of our planet. It was the extinction of all extinctions, referred to as the Great Dying. The Permian mass extinction took out at least 95% of all life on the planet in fewer than 100,000 years, an instant in geological time. Professor Paul Wignall of the University of Leeds, and an expert on mass extinctions, told me that the Permian was the greatest crisis that life on Earth has ever suffered. Only in the past 2 decades has the cause of the Permian extinction been understood. It was speculated that an asteroid impact may have been the trigger, but more recent research by Professor Wignall, geologists, and other scientists around the world have revealed the true trigger came from deep within the Earth. The Permian mass extinction was initiated by a colossal flow of lava in an area of what is now Siberia. That was the trigger, but not the killer. The killer was under the water and under the ice, where trillions of tons of greenhouse gases, largely derived from carbon and frozen in the form of crystalline methane, lay in wait. Thus, global warming is the force behind the death of nearly everything on the planet during the Permian mass extinction. That point is well illustrated. You can again see the spikes of mass extinctions measured by the increase in global temperatures, with the largest spike representing the Permian mass extinction. Wignall told me, there have been a lot of disasters and crises in the geological past. It's interesting to study them because they may have a comparison to today. He added, I think it is certainly extremely significant that a lot of the main crises of the past are associated with global warming, with obvious implications for the present day. The 6th mass extinction may even rival the speed and intensity of the Great Permian mass extinction, but the 6th is not represented on either of the 2 previous charts. That's because it's the one happening today, right now, all around us. And then we go on to document how the burning of fossil fuels is throwing an amount of carbon into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that's relatively similar to what happened with that giant volcanic eruption in Siberia 250 million years ago with the Permian mass extinction, and how it could be leading to a major extinction event. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I was reading Counterpunch. Actually, it was either somebody in the chat room, I'm pretty sure it was in our chat room, perhaps on Twitter, who pointed this out to me, this article by Kenneth Surin over on Counterpunch that I thought was just absolutely brilliant. And a brilliant analysis, not just of British politics, but also British media. And so I wanted to get him on the program to talk with us about this. Professor
Kenneth Surin is a professor of literature, of religion, and critical theory at Duke University. He's a regular contributor to Counterpunch. Counterpunch.org is the website. And you can tweet Counterpunch at @NatCounterpunch, excuse me. Professor Surin, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks
Glad to be on it.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'd love to start with the place that you sort of started in your article, which is the insanely right-wing nature of British media. And if I can put that in a U.S. frame, Bernie Sanders and Tom Perez, the head of the DNC and one of the two major Democratic candidates for president, are doing this tour of red states around the United States. They were in Florida yesterday, drew a huge crowd. Not one word in any of our media about it. Yet it seems to me if this was instead the head of the Republican National Committee and, you know, say John McCain or Marco Rubio doing a tour of the United States, it would be covered wall to wall nonstop, you know, all crowd responses and everything else. We saw the same thing in the primary. It's like genuine progressives are invisible. You put this in the context of Jeremy Corbyn, but, you know, is this what's happening in the UK as well?
Well, I think, if anything, it's a little bit worse. The newspaper industry is a bit more prevalent in the UK than it is in the US. A lot of people, especially older individuals, still get their information from print media. So the impact is correspondingly greater, even though the tendency towards bias prevails in both countries.
You write the Sun is owned by Rupert Murdoch. The Nazi-supporting, tax-dodging Rothmere family own the Daily Mail. Richard Dirty Desmond, former head of a soft porn empire, owns the Daily Express. Russian oligarch owns the Evening Standard. You mentioned The Guardian is basically the only paper that will even allow, you know, Murdoch owns The Times. The tax-dodging Barclay brothers own the Daily Telegraph, and another Russian oligarch owns the Independent. Is there, you know, outside of The Guardian, the two British papers that I read every day are The Guardian and the Financial Times. And the Financial Times, of course, is very conservative. Outside of The Guardian, how did it get this way? How did the media ecosystem in the United Kingdom become so dominated by oligarchs, billionaires, and right-wingers? And to what extent do you think the exact same thing is happening in the United States right now?
This state of affairs has existed for a long time in the UK. It's not something that emerged with the onset of neoliberalism, which I think is the case in the United States. The Minister of Production in Winston Churchill's cabinet during the Second World War was a very powerful newspaper baron, Lord Beaverbrook. So the Rothermeres, the Beaverbrooks, etc., did possess the equivalent of newspaper empires even prior to the Second World War. With the entry of Rupert Murdoch, of course, the situation changed significantly because Murdoch was not content simply to own stuff. He also wanted to transform the appearance of newspapers, the way they were produced, and that, of course, necessitated union busting in the first instance, and later on the introduction of computerized technologies in the production of newspapers. So this was an epochal shift in print media. And that can be attributed to Murdoch almost entirely.
Yeah, and here in the United States, Fox News is Rupert Murdoch's personal property, essentially. And I would submit to you that were it not for Fox News, we probably wouldn't have had President Bush, and we certainly wouldn't have President Trump. What say you?
Well, I think that's the case. my wife is American, and she has family members who, alas, listen to Fox News, and that is their primary source of information, regrettably.
It's like becoming a member of a cult. So you also write about how Jeremy Corbyn, who is probably the closest the UK has, he's the head of the Labour Party there, closest they have to Bernie Sanders in the United States, is vilified. I'm constantly seeing Jeremy Corbyn trashed in the Financial Times and other papers. He's disheveled, or I mean, these kinds of characterizations, and almost never do they cite or discuss his policies. Is Jeremy Corbyn, a weird, eccentric guy, or is he just a genuine progressive and the media doesn't like it?
To be honest, he's both.
Mm-hmm.
He's a vegetarian. He digs an allotment. He prefers riding his bicycle to using official limousines. And he buys his clothes, though not recently, I suspect, because there has been some attempt on the part of the team around him to make him look more like an official politician. But before that, he bought his clothes from a flea market. So in terms of official politics, he is an eccentric, but he is also a progressive politician. Now, I have a piece coming out in Counterpunch next week where I cite a study by the London School of Economics, which says that only 11% of the print media in the UK even accurately represent one of his policies correctly.
Wow.
When it comes to two of the more right-wing papers, the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, this figure for representing even one of Corbyn's policies correctly falls to 0%. This is a well-founded study by the London School of Economics.
Yeah. Now, there's not that. I would assert that there's a similar either misrepresentation or lack of representation of the positions of Corbyn's analog here in the United States, Bernie Sanders, who typically was described as a fringe candidate, as a rumpled guy, and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And there's this media blackout on him right now. There certainly was during the primary, at least during the 2015 part of the primary. There was 6 months there where he had a total of like 18 seconds of national media, whereas Donald Trump was getting hour after hour after hour. Is it because of the same media dynamic, ownership of billionaires and big transnational corporations?
Well, yes, I think it's that. There is increasingly a mutual permeation between centers of power and the owners of media conglomerates. Murdoch just has to pick up the phone and can get lunch or dinner with any British Prime Minister, including Tony Blair, of course. Corbyn is not going to be like this, and I suspect if Sanders did get anywhere in the presidential race, he would likewise establish some distance between him and people like Murdoch. But all the other politicians are basically playing this game on both sides of the Atlantic.
Right. Right, and to a large extent, it's called the access game. If you're nice to the politicians, then they'll come on your program, and if they refuse to come on your program, then because so much of television in particular is guest-driven, if you can't get big-name guests on a TV show, you lose your multi-million-dollar-a-year job, and somebody else comes along who will get those guests and treat them nicely and not call them on their lies, regardless of party.
Oh, this is a standard tactic on the part of Rupert Murdoch when he deals with British politicians. And in addition to access, there is, of course, a whole slew of delegitimizing instruments that can be used by the right-wing media. You're familiar with them in this country. Unfavorable photographs, and also discrediting a candidate by saying last year he met with this Arab politician,
right,
or et cetera, et cetera,
assassination
et
by
cetera.
innuendo, essentially,
Oh, well, yes. I
or
mean, that's,
anecdote.
yes, that's a stock in trade for these people.
Yeah. And that was well established by Murdoch in the UK when he first started the media. I mean, didn't this start in Australia, really, when he was buying media properties in Australia back 40 years ago?
I'm not so familiar with the Australian chapter in his personal history, but I suspect this has been his modus operandi for a long time, so it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, remarkable stuff. Professor Kenneth Surin, it's a brilliant article. I commend people to go to counterpunch.org and check it out. The UK general election, Corbyn's vilification and Labour's possible fight is the headline. And Professor Surin, Professor of Religion and Critical Theory at Duke University, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Great talking with you. It's very, very informative. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls on after this. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Find my mouse here. There you go. Kevin in Fayetteville, North Carolina, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Long time no talk to. How you been?
Great. Hope you're well.
Hanging in there. Above ground and upright. So.
There you go.
Okay. What I wanted to talk to you about is about the battle. It seems like there's a battle in the DNC and the DLC between the establishment and the establishment consultants, who are they're running the DNC and DLC are they're quite afraid to lose that 15% commission on their jobs that they get. If the DNC goes toward a more grassroots approach.
Yeah, there is a political industrial complex. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that's where the fight is. They're controlling. It seems like they're one of the major controlling factors there.
Right.
Keeping the grassroots people down.
I don't disagree. Or at least competing with the grassroots folks.
Or hampering them when they can, like they did with Bernie during the primary.
Yep.
Okay.
And they're continuing to, in my opinion.
Yeah, continuing to. Yeah, exactly. And like not helping that guy that was just running in, not Georgia, the other one. Was it Ossoff, the one that just lost by 7 points?
No, that Ossoff was in Georgia. The Thompson was the fellow in what was the state? Kansas. That's right. It was in Kansas. Thompson was his name.
Lost by 7 points. Now that was winnable if they had put their backbone into it.
Oh, it was absolutely winnable. Yes.
But establishment, okay, they don't candidates, and they also don't understand that people are fed up with candidates that take big donor money.
Yeah.
They absolutely do not want to support that.
Yeah.
And 90% of people want money out of politics. So.
Yep.
And the establishment should have. The establishment would rather fight tooth and nail against the true populist progressive, and have them lose and have a Republican win because the donors are the same.
Yeah.
They get what they want either way.
Yeah. No disagreement, Kevin.
Corporate Dems like Joe Manchin and the rest, they have to go because they're never there when we need them, like with the Gorsuch vote and many others.
Yeah.
There's no need for them. They need to be primaried. Have you heard of, you know Cenk Uygur, right?
Yeah, I do. I know Cenk.
Yeah, have you checked out Wolfpack? They're doing an all-volunteer to get a limited constitutional convention to get money out of politics.
Yeah.
They have 5 states so far that they got it ratified in. And in Rhode Island, I don't know if you heard this, but in Rhode Island, you know Common Cause, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, they're more of a professional lobbying group. They're not volunteers. And Common Cause went and made a stink with, I think it was in Rhode Island, to not pass this. Because if it does get passed, then they're out of a job because PACs go away.
No, I think the concern, I disagree with Cenk on this. I don't think we should have a constitutional convention. I think the political environment is too toxic and too polluted by big money for a constitutional convention, and the Koch brothers have been working really, really hard to have one, and they are now in control of 32 states. It takes 34 states to call a constitutional convention. And there are a number of people writing about this, about the dangers of a constitutional convention, because then you can tinker with literally everything in the Constitution. I think the way to do it is the way that Move to Amend and most of the other groups, including Public Citizen, are doing it, which is offer a constitutional amendment, use Article 5, use that process to move that amendment through 34 states, and then have 37 states ratify it. Congress has no say in the matter, and it becomes an amendment to the Constitution. But to hold a convention, I think that's extremely dangerous. Kevin, thank you for the call.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Andrew in Windsor, California. Excuse me. Hey, Andrew, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to present something to you, and I don't necessarily believe it, but I wanted to get your insights on it.
Okay.
It's basically that Donald Trump was either foreseeable or inevitable. In recent media, like in the movie Wall Street or Back to the Future, there were characters that were sort of based off of Donald Trump.
Yeah, Biff.
They were like Carl Fox, Bud Fox's father in Wall Street, says literally to Gordon Gekko, the guy who is based off of Carl Icahn, who's in the Trump administration, and he's also based off of Donald Trump himself. He says there came into Egypt a pharaoh who did not know, which is from the Bible, when the pharaoh in Exodus, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't know the divine line of Joseph and all that. Same with Back to the Future, Biff, being obsessed with money. I also kind of see a connection in sort of maybe it would be foreseeable if you took a platonic the Republic view, that each generation declines, and that the generation that was in the Great Depression became sort of money orientated, and then the generation of the 60s and the 70s was the democratic man, which is sort of democratization of power. But then, in Plato says that right after the democratic generation, there's the tyrannical generation, kind of us being I'm young, I kind of notice we're kind of obsessed with pleasure, and we're not really looking into deep things. So I don't know. I was just wondering if you think that there is sort of, this was kind of foreseeable, that almost inevitable.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely foreseeable, and inevitable I'm not sure about. There are external forces that have promoted this, which is the contamination of our politics by money, and the rise of power of our Supreme Court, starting with John Marshall, frankly, in 1803 with Marbury versus Madison. But to this day, the Supreme Court now is an unelected kingdom, essentially, king and queendom. They have asserted that their authority is higher than that of the president and higher than that of Congress. And nowhere in the Constitution does it say that. In fact, in Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, it explicitly says that the Supreme Court shall be regulated by Congress. So they're subordinate to Congress. But that is not what they say. They say it's the other way around. So we've got this, what should be a constitutional crisis that really started during the Jefferson administration. that has brought us to this point. But you know, the Plato stuff that you're talking about, I've never read that part of Plato. I'm familiar with his, the cave stuff and all that, but it sounds an awful lot like Strauss and Howe's book, The Fourth Turning, that there are 4 generations, and and these 4 generations constantly reset themselves, and at each 4th generation, you have the 4th turning. You have this time of great crisis, economic crisis, military crisis, and typically world war. And which is, Steve Bannon, by the way, has been pitching, or saying it was an inspiration for him. And I quote at some length in my book, The Crash of 2016. So I do think that there is an intergenerational piece to this. Andrew, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Anything Goes Friday. More of your calls right after this.
With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Healing ADD. Richard Bandler, the founder of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, wrote the foreword for this book. And it's basically a book on NLP as applied to people with ADHD, but it's actually a pretty good book on NLP, which is actually how I originally wrote it. So we're on chapter 8 on page 80, Reconstructing the Past. Different types of memories, regardless of how anchored in reality or fantasy they may be, are stored in our brains in different ways. These forms of storage involve the 5 sensory modalities: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feeling, and the subtle gradations of each sense, such as color, brightness, or contrast for the visual modality, for example. These gradations are referred to as submodalities. This is true for both adults and children. One of the ways our brain organizes information is according to the way it's stored. Our senses pick up something in the outside world. Say we see an insect fly by. That's an objective thing that we've seen. However, before that image makes its way to our conscious brain, it's processed by other parts of the mind and tweaked and tuned. If it's a bug that frightens us, perhaps a wasp, then the mind sees it as a bigger object and in sharper contrast than it really is. Other objects in the picture, the background, buildings, grass, whatever, become more distant, dull, perhaps even less colorful. The mind may increase the volume of the sound associated with the wasp and also attach a feeling to the image, probably a variation on what we might interpret as fear or panic, a feeling felt perhaps in the pit of the stomach or the trembling of the hands. So here's a quick list of some of the submodalities that we commonly use to experience reality and store memory. In the visual field, color or black and white. So this is how do you remember things visually? Color or black and white, contrast, size, bordered or not, moving or still, brightness, graininess, distance from us, associated or disassociated. In other words, do we see the scene as we saw it, or do we see ourselves in it? Focus, detail, texture, perspective, dimensionality, is it flat or 3D? Proportion, that's the visual field. In auditory, loudness, tonality, distance, pitch, melody, inflection, location, tempo, duration. Gustatory, salty, sweet, spicy, musty, bitter, familiar, delicate. Olfactory, strong, faint, intermittent, familiar, unique, musty, moist, damp, mildewy. Kinesthetic, the feeling. Hard, soft, cool, warm, sharp, electric, intensity, duration, speed, location. Now here's the amazing part. If you know what modalities and submodalities your mind uses to store a particular type of memory, happy, sad, hopeful, afraid, neutral, whatever kind of memory it is, then you can adjust the memories you have of the past to change their emotional feel. For example, think of something, a memory of something that you did in the recent past, such as brushing your teeth last night. Mentally list the qualities of the submodalities. Your list might look something like mine. I see a still picture in black and white without a lot of contrast or detail. Associated, I see the mirror in the sink, but not myself. No border, 3D, about 2 feet square, about 20 feet away from me. I can hear the sound of the water running and taste the mint of the toothpaste. If I concentrate on it, I can remember, or imagine remembering, the feeling of the toothpaste on my toothbrush on my gum and the smell of the toothpaste. The feelings I associate with the memory are pretty neutral. Boredom might be the best way to describe it. It's something I do every night. Now imagine a control panel just below the image, or wherever you'd like it to be, with levers and dials that you can use to change the various submodalities. Reach out and change a few of the submodalities and see how things change. When I move the picture from black and white to color, I suddenly feel curious and interested in the process of brushing my teeth. It seems fascinating. If I turn up the volume, I become uneasy. As I increase the mint taste, I feel more awake. Nobody knows why this works the way it does. One theory is that the brain stores information holographically rather than digitally, so that the brain sees its own storage capacity as a three-dimensional space. Because we experience the world through our senses, it makes sense that we could organize the mechanism for storing the information about our experience of the world along sensory lines as well. When something is put into a particular space, it acquires the sensory nature of that space, since sensory signals are how we experience the world. So when a memory is put into the boring category in our brain, it becomes, in my case, everybody's different, but it becomes, for me, black and white still pictures and all the other submodalities I described before. When the submodalities are adjusted and the pictures are turned into a color movie, it doesn't just change the memory. It actually causes us to interconnect with or slide to a different storage place, a physical different storage space in my holographic brain. There's also a concept known as a critical submodality. That's the submodality which has the ability to shift others, probably the primary hook into the place in the brain hologram where the memory is stored. As you're going through the various submodalities, changing each one a bit in one way or another, turning up or down the brightness, the volume, you'll notice that there's generally one particular one. It could be anything from volume to contrast to smell to brightness, anything. It causes the entire picture to change and creates a sudden shift in the feelings associated with that memory. That submodality shift is the critical submodality. And once you know what your critical submodalities are, you can do this process much quicker. One of the most common and most powerful critical submodalities is location. When you move a picture from where it is, for example, in front and to the right about 4 feet away to some other place, for example, in front and slightly over your eyes, only a foot away, it often changes dramatically its impact. So it goes from there to talk about how to take memories that bother you or that haunt you even and transform them into things that are simply just who cares memories. The book is Healing ADD, Simple Exercises That Will Change Your Daily Life.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Anything Goes Friday. Jay in Olympia, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Jay, what's up?
Yes, I wanted to talk about economics. And with a lot of people, when I bring up the subject, their eyes just seem to glaze over. But one of the many things is, like, what is wealth? How is it made? What is money? How do banks operate? Things like that, and including the Federal Reserve, who they are, who's behind them, and things like that. And I learned a lot of this on a website by a guy named Bill Still, and it's called The Money Masters. And I learned more about money, economics, and one thing or another than all the history classes I ever had in college.
Does he charge you money for any of this information?
No, it's free, and the program is 3 hours and 45 minutes long, and he essentially goes back. It goes back to when money came about, but it really concentrates with the Rothschilds. And
oh, geez. Okay.
They became
Jay, let me warn you, there is so much right-wing stuff out there that all boils down to, oh my God, it's Jewish bankers. Be careful. If you really, Ellen, if you want a good, unbiased, genuine, deep dive understanding of money and the history of money and everything else, please let me recommend to you Ellen Brown. Her website is webofdebt.com. It's also the title of her major book. She writes regularly for Huffington Post, other publications. And Ellen Brown is brilliant. I don't know anything about this guy that you're talking about, and I don't want to go any farther if that's the direction he's going. But Jay, thanks for the call. Charlie in Phoenix, listening on KPHX. Hey, Charlie, what's up? Excuse me. Charlie, you're on the air. Okay, no Charlie. Howard in Valley Village, California. What's up, Howard? Howard? Our phone's croaking? I don't know. I'm going to put Howard on hold. He's on line 9 there if you want to check him out, Nate. Ian in Draper, Utah. Ian, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I hear you fine, Ian. What's up?
Right on. First-time caller, so excited to be on here. A little nervous, of course, but anyways, I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
I live in Draper, and as you know, I've been hearing you talk about Jason Chaffetz a little bit, and I was pretty excited to hear that he was going to be canceling his re-election. That's pretty cool. I think Orrin Hatch also is going to be done, who I would love to see go. But
well, that's not a done deal yet, is it? I mean, Orrin Hatch is still playing hard to get.
Yeah, no,
I
it's
believe.
just really rumors right now. But
yeah,
I was just thinking about that. But I wanted to talk about war. That's my main issue, I think, and especially this Trump presidency. It's really got my blood boiling when I think about they're taking action in Syria and what could possibly go wrong in North Korea and ratcheting up tensions with Iran.
And Yemen and Libya.
Yemen, yeah.
And
I emailed back and forth with Noam Chomsky, which is, I love that he responds to anybody. But I talked to him about Saudi Arabia and how we're just allowing this massacre to take place in Yemen, and all the while calling Iran the great destabilizer. You know, that just...
Right. Because they're supporting the Houthis, and the more or less aligned with the Shia rather than the Sunni. Yeah, this is internecine warfare.
Yeah, but I will leave you with I know and I'm not sure the complete veracity of the numbers, but I remember reading reports on internal Pentagon documents releasing data on the drone warfare civilian death reports, and I know it took a lot of fighting to get the numbers, but somewhere around, like, really ridiculous percentage, 80 to 90% of the time under Obama, the drone strikes got the unintended target. They didn't get the people they were going for, and, that obviously leads to thousands of wrongful deaths. But I'm just wondering, 9 out of 10 deaths under Obama were wrong with the drones. Under Trump, he's decided to loosen up the regulations on war, which are already loose enough. How many people are going to have to die before, people start realizing the sanitation of war has gotten out of control? And
yeah, well, the sanitation of war got out of control with Vietnam, and it continues. I think that the Obama White House would dispute your 9 out of 10 numbers, but they wouldn't dispute that there were, particularly in the early years of the Obama administration, a number of unintentional deaths, wedding parties and whatnot being blown up because they thought they were terrorist groups. Collateral damage, people being killed just because they happen to be in the proximity. And I've argued for some time that while this may keep our soldiers out of the line of fire, which was the principal goal of drone warfare, I think, is to not have American casualties, it causes more people on the ground multi-generationally to hate us because we kill innocent people, and they know they're innocent people. And family members, clan members, tribe members. And Trump has loosened this up, so it's going to get worse and worse. We should either fight a war to win, or there's a conversation I had, I think, yesterday with a conservative. You either fight a war to win or you don't fight it. And if you're going to fight a war to win, you better be ready to put the country back together when you're done, like we did after World War II, with Germany. And we've shown no inclination to do that either. So we've got a foreign policy that was driven by George Bush's desire to get himself reelected by declaring war in Iraq, and a country that had nothing to do with 9/11 or anything else for them. It represented no threat to us, and in fact was a major stabilizing influence in the Middle East. And here we are with this entirely destabilized region as a result of George W. Bush's political ambitions. This is not a good thing. And now it looks to me like Donald Trump, who campaigned on being a non-interventionist, on saying we're not going to run around the world and shove democracy down people's throats with the barrel of a gun. We will live by example. We're going to put America together. We're going to, focus our resources here at home. Instead, now he wants to strip resources from us at home. He wants to foul the air and the water. He wants to, defund public transportation. And what public transportation he wants to build out by infrastructure has to be stuff that can be monetized by billionaires, because he wants them to put up the money, because he's going to give these tax cuts to billionaires, so government won't be able to pay for it. And it's just, it's like the third worldization of the United States is continuing apace.
at the same time that he's also discovered, you know, what James Madison explicitly warned us against, which is the seductive nature of war to the executive, to the president. And I would say Trump has been seduced by it, and he's a man that, you know, when he's seduced by something, you don't want to be in the neighborhood. You know, it's not a good thing. You know, no pun or implication intended. Although I think there's a bunch of them that are fairly obvious. Anyhow, Ian, good point. Good points all. Thanks for the call. Jim in Los Angeles. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. You and I were both so frustrated with your caller on abortion, where abortion is murder. Let's end that right now. You asked him what his punishment would be. The punishment is already there for murder. Okay, the woman gets the death penalty. The lover, the husband, the father, is a conspiracy to commit murder. The doctor gets the death penalty. Even the nurse, the one who takes the call and sets up the appointment is.
So what's your point, Jim?
Yes. And don't ask them what the law is already. If they say abortion is murder, that's the penalty.
Oh, I see. So your argument is once they make that claim, then they can no longer claim to say, well, you know, and therefore we have a nuanced response to it, which is what Donald Trump tried to do. You know, when Chris Matthews pinned him down and said, well, should you punish the women? And Donald said, well, yeah, I guess so. And then, you know, within a few days, Jim, thanks for the call. He had backtracked from that, realizing that, you know, that's political suicide, but it is the logical thing. So, yeah, anyway, I really don't like fighting the abortion wars. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. David in Chicago. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Can you hear me?
I hear you fine, David. What's up?
Excellent. My question is, to the best of your knowledge, and what do you think of this idea, has the Democratic Party and or, say, a group of extremely wealthy Democrats, such as George Soros, ever seriously considered creating a Democratic media empire to counter the Rupert Murdoch empire?
Yeah, there was an effort at it.
Imitate, obviously, the despicable techniques of the Rupert Murdoch empire, but that would do what you have often referred to as the fairness doctrine, go back to the ideal format of a real news show, but it would give the Democrats an opportunity to get the kind of fair coverage for such things as Bernie Sanders and Tom Perez's tour of the states that you said early in the program was completely blacked out by the corporate media. So has this ever been seriously considered, and do you think this is a viable idea? To me, it seems absolutely the obvious thing to do. So what do you think?
In 2003, I wrote an op-ed on Common Dreams titled Talking Back to Talk Radio, in which I suggested that there was actually a business model that you could use to make money doing progressive talk radio, because there was so much demand for it in the United States, and there was absolutely no programming, that the big corporations that owned virtually all the radio stations simply had no interest in putting progressive programming on because it tended to challenge their business interests. And Shelley and Anita Drobny, a couple of financiers in Chicago, called me up, and I flew out to Chicago and met with them and John Sinton, and we essentially put together Air America. Shelley wrote a book called The Road to Air America, in which he reprints my article as the original business plan of Air America. The problem that they had was, over the course of the 5 or so years that Air America ran, they burned through about $17 million. That's the amount of money that they lost. And they ran out of money. $17 million is a lot of money. And at least one of the people who was on Air America was being paid, several $1 million a year, an absurd amount of money which was, hurting Air America. But they ran out of money. But that was $17 million. Rupert Murdoch lost $100 million a year for 5 years. Now, it declined over those 5 years, but probably by the 5th year, it was $30 or $40 million. But it started out $100 million a year. He lost money for 5 years on Fox News before Sean Hannity made his first penny. Right? And so it was really not that, in my opinion, it was not that Air America failed. It was that Air America was underfunded. And, there were some problems with management. I'll acknowledge that I had my own problems with the management at Air America. I was on Air America. But, yeah, there was an attempt. And there were a number of good members of Democrats in Congress who were very supportive of this effort and helped raise money for it or helped, connect people to raise money for it. I wasn't in the middle of the whole money-raising thing, so I can't give you any detail on that. But I know that there were, supportive people. But after that went down in flames, there's been just this fear. So the closest thing we've got now to a national progressive media empire is Free Speech TV. And, Free Speech TV has picked up the torch and they're running with it, and God bless them for it. And it's why we all need to be supportive of Free Speech TV, in my opinion. But that's it right now. And so, David, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much to our show director, Louise Hartman, to my executive producer, Sean Taylor, to our video director, Chris Mendelis, to our radio and TV producer, Troy Miller, our phone screener, Nate Atwell, to our writer-researcher, Nate Sweet, to our webmasters, Nigel Peacock and Jamie Holly, to our business manager, Ron Hartenbaum, to everyone at our syndicators, Digital Media, Pacifica Radio, SiriusXM Satellite Radio, Cable Radio Network, and Free Speech TV on Dish Network, DirecTV, and all the cable providers who carry our show, including Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We're in every home in Manhattan now. Be sure and tell your friends. And all the others around the country, to all the great folks at Free Speech TV and RTTV who work on the big picture, the Progressive Voices channel on TuneIn, to Netroots Radio, to our newsletter editor, Sue Nethercutt, the folks in our chat room, to Ellen Ratner, Victoria Jones, Bob Ney, and everyone at Talk Media News, to Jay Goodman-Tamboli for tech support, to our affiliates, our sponsors, and to you for supporting our program. Thank you. Thank you very much. Holbert in Pearlington, Mississippi. Hey, Holbert, what's on your mind today?
Price of oil.
The price of oil. Okay, it's been falling the last week or so.
Well, its real price is actually much, much lower. I've told you before I have a degree in geology, and it was obvious to me a third of a century ago that there's far more oil in the world than there should be, or we originally believed there was.
Right.
But the entire conspiracy is to keep the price artificially high, because our currency is based on this mistaken belief that it's scarce and expensive and that we have to meddle in other countries to get it. We have a huge supply of our own. And I have noticed for the last 44 years that anytime anybody comes up with a significant technology that can improve fuel economy of vehicles, it mysteriously disappears almost as soon as it appeared.
Yeah.
I've seen this happen again and again. It's obvious to me that they're buying patents out and squirreling them away in corporate vaults.
Did you see the movie Who Killed the Electric Car?
I've heard of it,
yeah.
And I know that they did everything they could to get rid of that.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah.
The problem we face, if we did what I recommend, which two things. One, use or lose clause in patent law, that if you don't produce something you've got a patent on, you lose the patent after, say, 7 years, 10 years, whatever.
Yep.
And the other is antitrust action against the oil companies to make them divest themselves of any interest in auto companies.
Yeah, I think those are both great ideas. Holbert, I got to move along, but thank you for getting right to the essence of it. I think those are both very good ideas. Appreciate the call. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Yeah, hi. I think for those strict constitutionalists, we should go back to calling the Defense Department the War Department. And every budget has to be for the war. And that way, people will be able to directly associate war with spending that kind of money.
Well, if we also took Dennis Kucinich's suggestion and created a Department of Peace, and the Department of Peace was tasked with promoting peace and putting countries back together after wars, then we'd have a really clear definition of what's what. Because right now, a lot of the Defense Department's budget, I don't know if it's a large percentage, but it's certainly tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, is dedicated to, quote, rebuilding countries. In other words, peace, when in fact it typically doesn't end up that way. It ends up as sweetheart contracts to donors to politicians.
Yeah, and I just was wondering where we would be today if April Gillespie hadn't given tacit approval to Saddam Hussein to invade Kuwait, and he kept the full strength of his army when 9/11 happened.
Yeah, people don't track the current state of the disastrous state of the Middle East, all the way back to George Herbert Walker Bush's invasion of Kuwait and southern Iraq. But that's really where it all started. And then the sanctions that followed that. And prior to that, our playing both sides against each other by providing intelligence and support to both the Iranians and the Iraqis during a war that cost over 1 million people in both countries. So, we have not been an honest broker in that region for a long, long time. Bill, thanks for the call. Dave in Radcliffe, Kentucky. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I just wanted to say, because a young person called and was talking about the drone warfare under Obama, and because right-wingers right now are very effectively demonizing President Obama about that, I just wanted to say the true nature of it is the way we're using drones are as a standoff weapon, just like artillery. Any sort of standoff weapon is going to have unintended casualties. The difference is with an artillery battery, if you have unintended casualties, you can address the victims. You can pay compensation. There's all kinds of things you can do to mitigate. With the drones, the way we're using them right now, it's almost impossible to mitigate the unintended casualties. And that goes back to your point where you said it is creating a generational animus.
Yeah.
Okay, it's generational hostility. But so many young people are falling for this right-wing war solves everything bull crud. I mean, it really kind of hurts my heart. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, I'm totally with you, Dave. And in part, it's because there's just an enormous amount of cheerleading in the media. You get all these generals on who are experts, right? But they actually are also, multimillionaire consultants to various defense companies that hired them after they left the Pentagon. And then they go on TV and nobody discloses that, hey, if there's a war, this guy's going to make a lot more money. So it's a mess. Dave, thanks for the call. Kurt in Los Angeles. Hey, Kurt, you wanted to talk about Berkeley?
Yeah, I did, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. First and foremost, I want to give a thumbs up and a God bless to each and every student, faculty member, and administrator that initially stood up or stood behind the cancellation of Dan Coulter's visit to the campus. And the fact that they went ahead and offered a date, which happened to conveniently conflict with a predetermined date, another engagement that Coulter had, was rather funny to me. Mm-hmm. So they knew how to get out of the pickle.
I think where this is going, Kurt, is at some point we're going to have to, as a society, or at least universities are going to have to decide what is hate speech and what isn't. What is incitement and what isn't? What are the boundaries of the kind of people that you invite to speak? Do you invite Richard Spencer in, the head of basically the American Nazis? Do you invite him in or not? And, I think by and large the consensus is, okay, with somebody like Spencer, no, we don't invite him. We don't invite David Duke. Well, then why do you invite Ann Coulter when she doesn't wear the labels or the swastika, but she's saying many of the same things and is going to provoke much of the same response? So, it's and then there's this whole issue of right-wing provocateurs that, this piece by Alexander Rubinstein over at medium.com really nails down. Kurt, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Good points all. Steve in Santa Fe, Tennessee. Steve, we got 1 minute to the end of the show. It's yours. What's up?
Yeah, I just was wondering, it seems like a couple of years ago, everybody was asking, why don't the Congress and senators and the rest of the government officials have to get their own insurance plans just like the rest of us do, and we quit as taxpayers paying for their free insurance. It seems ridiculous to me if they had to go out and find insurance for themselves, I think they'd see the negativity that goes on in
Well,
trying
right
to
now, all of them have to get their insurance through the Obamacare exchanges. That was a Republican requirement to pass Obamacare, and so it is paid for though by you and me. But there's a lot of jobs that have free paid medical. I mean, my full-time employees here have free paid medical. I don't have a problem with that. Why would you deprive them of that?
Well, I feel like their salaries are at a level at which their benefits need to be cut. They're making more money than they deserve.
I think if we're going to cut anything, we need to cut the ability of right-wing billionaires and corporations to basically own these politicians, Steve. That's the big money scandal. It's not their salary. It's the amount of money that's slipping through into their pockets. And Tom Price playing the stock market continuously when he was a congressman, overseeing pharmaceuticals and drug devices, and then playing the stock market in those same areas with insider information, and then lying to Congress about that kind of stuff. Steve, thanks for the call. Thank you all for being with us this week. It's been a great week. Have a wonderful weekend, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, tag your.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead, our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions. But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them